Hello and welcome to another episode of Defense Uncut, the first dedicated English language Pakistani defense news and commentary podcast, where we unpack Pakistani military procurements, events, and broader strategic issues in focused detail so you can build a clearer and more accurate big picture. As always, today I have with me Arslan Khan. How are you, Arslan? How's it going? I'm doing well. Yeah, apologies to our listeners for the bit of a gap in our episodes, but it's just that we work on this part-time, so it's just we had to free up the time, and also we're just waiting for also things to talk about which are more regular and in line with the news cycle. But hopefully we'll be more regular with this. But anyways, let's just jump right into it. So the first, I think the big headliner overall has been the Mecca Joint Defence Agreement. We've written about this on the website as well. Obviously, I think every analyst has sort of come to the conclusion it's not necessarily like a quote-unquote Islamic NATO, even though there is a very similar Article 5 style provision, but it's very broad and open-ended. I don't think there's any like compulsion for any of the members involved to suddenly allocate military forces to help each other. And I don't think any one of them wants to do it, nor do they expect it. I think if there's, and Arslan, you can chime in, but I think if there's an opportunity here with this sort of agreement, it's also somewhat similar to NATO, but the real opportunity is the opportunity to build capacity. So you have three countries that have different strengths and different needs. I think with Saudi Arabia, you have immense fiscal capacity, but they also want to industrialize, diversify their economy, and also build reliable defense supply chains. I mean, part of, if you look at Saudi Arabia's military and defense posture, a lot of it, yes, they're dependent on Western contractors and Western OEMs and what have you, but a lot of it really boils down to just a lot of, I don't want to say gatekeeping, but let's say they have a lot of difficulty securing deep domestic supply chain capabilities, like in maintenance and what have you. They also maintain a very big force structure, which means that it takes longer for the local talent pool to catch up to it. So they have to fill in the gaps with the ex-US Air Force, ex-Royal Air Force, and those sorts of people, like, or contractors to sort of fill in the gaps until such time they have more locals. But I think now they have a competent local officer base, engineering base, and what have you. And they just want to now sort of build a native capability that allows them to basically maintain their own aircraft, maintain their own ships and what have you, and also produce them. They want to industrialize. They have some competitive strengths in that, where they can subsidize energy, which allows for lower cost steel production and what have you. And on the other hand, is also one of the challenges they have is securing munitions for their operations. And that also, again, creates a bit of a dependency and reliance on the US and others for that security umbrella, because in order to get those, let's say, in order to get the dependable chain or a dependable supply of munitions, you have to sort of concede on other factors. So by bringing in a country like Pakistan into the mix, you have a place where you can potentially manufacture and acquire those munitions at immense scale at a pretty low cost, with a relatively, as Pakistan is right now, a very underused, highly unemployed society, unfortunately, but there's a lot of capacity there that if with the right investment, you can probably activate. And Türkiye, I think, is well known. They have industrial know-how, they have defense products, but they need reliable, high-profile markets. And there's Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. And then in Pakistan, you have a very top-heavy R&D base with a lot of know-how, a lot of engineers, a lot of scientists, obviously nuclear energy personnel as well, which I think it wouldn't surprise me if part of this agreement, if it has real substantive elements to it, that part of this agreement involves, like, in exchange for fiscal capacity, loans, grants, whatever, Pakistan would start issuing more NOCs for like nuclear scientists and technicians and stuff and engineers to basically work in Saudi Arabia and Turkey to help with their programs. Obviously, Pakistan will not proliferate the technology that it has, but it has a lot of personnel and not a lot of jobs relative to the amount of people it produces in the nuclear field, unfortunately. So these are great outlets to sort of send these skilled people out, basically. And then there's some other aspects where with some investment, you can also definitely also industrialize Pakistan as well, which also helps it become a supply chain partner. So I think that's where, if they are serious, I think there's 50-50 they are. Like a 50-50 chance. We'll have to wait and see. But I think this is really the direction they're all looking. What do you think, Arslan?
Yeah, so firstly, we're just touching on the top-heavy Pakistan point. As Pakistan, the industry or whatever industry there is in Pakistan is quite design-heavy. We see a lot of designs being pumped out, but not all of them necessarily actually make it to production because there's no either financier, there's no backing, there's no demand. But one of the things Pakistan would always do is pump out these designs, and then they'd go to countries like Saudi Arabia, for example. And a good example of this was the GIDS Road to Future stuff. When it first launched, I remember the GIDS guys, they were all in Saudi Arabia lobbying and pushing for joint for funding and joint work on this sort of stuff, because with the Saudis, how it works, if you want to sell your product, you partner up with a local company and pitch them to the local armed forces. So for Pakistan, one of the biggest avenues for this like weapons development would always have been the Saudis would fund it and bankroll it, and then Pakistan would help them produce it in country or sell to them as well. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is one of the largest markets for Pakistani arms exports as well. So that's one of the main things with this. And one of the other things we spoke about this before as well, when the Saudi-Pakistan Pact happened as well, is having parallel production lines for key critical defense equipment like missiles and interceptors. Because let's say we had a interceptor factory in Pakistan, it's number one on the target list, right? But let's say we had a backup in Saudi Arabia, a backup in Turkey, and also our own individual stockpiles. We can all pull them together and we can all have this shared resource pool that is beneficial for all of us when it comes to conflict. However, but that stuff aside, and looking at this more from like a NATO angle, this isn't the first time we've seen these kind of agreements, right? We had SEATO and then we had CENTO as well, and both of them failed. And it's kind of unclear here where this will go, because obviously it's only a couple of days old, and we'll find out in the coming months whether this is another doomed or there's actually something here with this venture. One of the biggest problems with like SEATO and CENTO was, particularly with this like mutual defense stuff, there was no clear mutual defense clause, right? It was all sort of we consult and then we all act based off of our own constitutions and our own processes to decide whether we should support an ally or not. And the other thing was there was no integrated command, there was no standardization of weapons, there was no hosting of forces, there was no that guarantee that Article 5 didn't exist, right? We also had a lot of like geopolitical and political fragmentation. So there was little, for example, there were countries with like little connection to South Asia, like France or the UK. And CENTO, it had, obviously, we lacked the US, right? But not only that, there was also, the bigger problem was there's no common enemy. And this is the same thing we see here now with this pact as well, is there's no common interests between these countries, right? In NATO, the US, the Russians and the Soviet Union were the number one threat. In SEATO and CENTO, obviously the idea was to face off the communists, but really these countries were more interested in fighting their neighbors, like Pakistan and India, for example. So not necessarily the USSR. And now with this pact as well, we kind of run into the same issue. It's like, but who's this aimed at? These guys are all saying it's not aimed at Iran, and Pakistan and the Turks have good relationships with Iran. So that's the Saudis are uneasy with Iran now. The Turks are uncomfortable with Israel. The the Turks are more hostile to Israel than either Pakistan or Saudi Arabia is. And obviously, in Pakistan's case, we've got India. The Saudis and Indians are on good terms. The Turks and Indians also not on the worst terms. I mean, the Turks won't export arms to them, but other than that, there's no animosity. So now we run into the problem that there's three distinct enemies here, and there's no overlap with these three distinct enemies. So it's like, well, would Saudi Arabia fund a fight or join in a fight against India? Probably not. Would Pakistan and Saudi Arabia join in a fight against Israel? Probably not. Would Pakistan and Turkey join in a fight against Iran? Probably not. And the other bigger problem is there's no, these three countries that, firstly, we have no expeditionary ability, right? So if tomorrow Turkey was attacked, neither Pakistan nor Saudi Arabia is going to be able to be there. In the same way, if Pakistan was attacked, we don't share a land border. Like NATO works really, really well because all these countries are joined together. They're on the same continent. They're neighbors. It's a very solid block. If you need to move assets from one part of Europe, you can get into the NATO countries on the border. But if tomorrow Yemen and Saudi Arabia kicks off, Pakistan isn't going to be able to deploy its assets on the border, and neither is Turkey. And on top of that, what makes it worse is neither Pakistan nor Turkey nor Saudi Arabia have any real expeditionary capability. In Pakistan's case, none whatsoever, right? You've got some Hercs and whatnot. You can maybe move some assets, but realistically, you don't really have that sort of like mass transport stuff like LPDs and LHDs and all that sort of stuff. The Turks have a couple based off of Spanish design, and then the Saudis, I can't remember whether they've got anything or not, but the point is nothing significant, right? There's nothing significant there for these countries to actually be able to get together and fight. So now you've got three countries that are saying, oh, we'll fight together, we'll die together, we'll defend each other. But it's like, well, how are you going to do that? On top of that, none of these countries have there's no, for example, at the moment, maybe we'll see this down the line, but again, I would have expected to see some movement from now. Like we don't see NATO has like a permanent integrated command, right? We don't see any joint commands or any intention even to set something up between the three. Obviously, I've already said the geographic problem is a big one. There's no way of fixing that. The other thing is hardware interoperability. I mean, the Turks and the Saudis maybe can work something up, but Pakistan is kind of alienated there in a sense because the way Pakistan does things, and I think we've got a question on that, and we'll touch on that later, but the way Pakistan does things is very different to these guys. Pakistan relies on intermediary nodes and for it to link all of its assets together, whereas the Turks and the Saudis, they've got their own way. Pakistan's data link structure isn't real time, for example, whereas the others maybe via like Link 16 or whatever they use, it's more up to date. So there's also issues there. Obviously, the Pakistan relies heavily on Chinese weapons, where obviously the Turks, they've got their Russian, American air defense mix and local, and then the Saudis are all American. So it's like, well, how do we can't even check. I think the Israelis and the Arabs, they had this joint like air picture. So whenever there was a ballistic missile launch, they'd get a ton of early warning. We can't even do that among ourselves, or we can't do interception, stuff like this. That's again one of those things. We don't have that hardware interoperability of NATO either. The other thing is there's no solid military commitment, right? Like it's all lip service. We've not seen. Obviously, we don't know the terms of the agreements, right? We don't know anything on that front. But there's nothing to show. Neither country's gone with. I mean, Pakistan has some troops deployed in Saudi Arabia right now. That's no question. And Pakistan had deployed fighter jets in Saudi Arabia during the attacks from Iran. So yeah, Pakistan made some commitment, but again, it wasn't really anything you think. The Saudis had their own jets. The Saudis had their own air defense. If anything, the Greeks were probably even more active than Pakistan or Turkey in defending Saudi Arabia. The Greeks had deployed Patriots in Saudi Arabia, and they were actively intercepting Iranian ballistic missiles. So we're yet to see any real commitment from Pakistan, Saudi, or Turkey to actually work together. And obviously, I think there's a lot of like nuclear. There's always the nuclear question, which I mean, again, we can't really answer. But it's like, well, who's this nuclear threat towards? Israel is the only nuclear power that this bloc could be possibly seen as being against. But again, I don't really think there's that sort of anti-Israel posture within the bloc, except for maybe Turkey. Neither Pakistan, obviously, as much as Pakistanis don't like it, and as much as Khwaja Asif loves to put out his statements against Israel, I don't really think there's any real hostility there at the moment, any direct hostility. So it's like there's no real. There's just it's just very ambiguous, right? There's nothing. There's no the main things that NATO has is that common threat, that kind of stuff. There's none of that.
Yeah. So my most grounded reading, so what I presented before was my optimistic take, which I hope would be the case. I think that is the only real low hanging fruit is like capacity building, and it makes sense because in that sense, if all three, none of them are going to fight for each other directly, but together they can at least each of them build an independent capability to defend themselves, and that would be the ideal outcome, all things considered. But my more realistic take is that I think the real audience for this agreement are the domestics, like basically pretty domestic across all three countries, literally. Like on the one hand, you have within Pakistan, you have the national leadership going out really, and it goes back to Uncut, if you go through our articles, even the paywall ones, but you can read the excerpts and stuff, is that we had a thesis running since at least, I would say, June 2025, so 1 month after the conflict with India, where we said that despite the conflict with India, Pakistan is going to start looking west. It's going to focus more on Afghanistan. It's going to focus more on the Middle East. And that literally has played out. And now, as that has been playing out, and all the fanfare and all those like big ticket so-called agreements that Reuters has been reporting and all this kind of stuff, despite all that, no one is literally seeing the tangible outcome from it. No one in Pakistan is seeing, or for example, I'll give you a very classic example. Trump called up Field Marshal Asim Munir, his favorite field marshal, right? J.D. Vance said like his two most important people are like an Indian and a Pakistani, right? The field marshal and his wife. And despite that, Pakistan just still got hit with additional tariffs. So clearly people within Pakistan, and what I mean by people, I'm not just talking about the electorate. I mean, let's say, frankly, to be honest, like the national leadership doesn't care about the electorate and the public or you or me. But the people of, let's say, some measure of influence, authority, and power, let's say, for example, Pakistan's steel producers, Pakistan's exporters, they're asking, hey, dude, you went out and did all this fanfare and you went to the White House and what have you. Forget F-16s, forget U.S. technology, forget grants and aid and this and that all other past Pakistani leaders were able to bring, or Pakistani dictators were able to bring. Even especially Musharraf and Zia Haq and these guys. Forget all that. You couldn't even protect us from tariffs. Right. So there is, at least within Pakistan, I would say within the security establishment, I think Pakistan does have a security establishment. I don't think security is necessarily driven solely by one or two individuals, although it can seem like that. But those individuals have to answer to a group, a system, right? The system hums along, right? It's a very powerful system. We saw it play out in Iran. Before the conflict with the U.S., people would have thought that everything was literally, Americans thought that everything piped through the senior leadership of Khamenei and the IRGC generals, the top ones. But as soon as they were removed, suddenly things just diffused, right? And the system emerged. The IRGC system emerged. It's very similar in Pakistan, I would say, in a very broad sense, that there is a security establishment. This is how, without an establishment, without a system, we would not be able to have nuclear weapons. So clearly, there's a machine, and the machine is asking, and the machine includes not just generals, but it also includes big industrialists, includes financiers, it includes big people in the country, major landlords, even political power brokers. They're asking, like, what is this? Because at the end of the day, it's like, yes, Asim Munir, Field Marshal Asim Munir is a top leader right now, but at the end of the day, leaders come and go, right? And the ones who make a leader are these people, right? So you have to maintain this. So I think that's in the Pakistan side, that there's a bit of selling going on there. Then in Saudi Arabia, I think it's possible that some groups within the Saudi monarchy felt very uncomfortable with the fact that they felt that America did not honor its security agreement. It did not guarantee the protection that they were expecting. Although you could argue that America did provide the Patriots and all this kind of stuff. It did help mobilize NATO allies and what have you. But at the end of the day, MBS might be under pressure to show that, hey, I'm building backups, I'm building resiliency, I'm doing other things to establish other forms of security guarantees and what have you. And then in Turkey, you have obviously like I think one of the recurring conversation points has been about the nuclear question and all that. But to be frank, I don't think they need Pakistan to develop a nuclear capability. I don't think they want to even be considered an overt nuclear power. I think for Turkey and even Saudi Arabia, their goal would be to just, as we say, just develop the nuclear fuel cycle. So you have the ability to go nuclear in terms of weapons anytime you want, but you don't have to do it. But as long as you have the full fuel cycle, that option will always be available to you should you activate it. And I think if you follow the Saudi-US nuclear talks, America has basically been willing to help them build that fuel cycle, and that too with relatively limited safeguards, to leave the option, the door open to the Saudis to one day potentially capitalize on it. And same with the Turks. I think the Turks would probably operate on a similar perspective. Like, I'll give you an interesting example. Like, if you follow Pakistan's history of the history of Pakistan's nuclear energy program, the way it started out initially was that, and this is like in the early 70s, was that they basically wanted to acquire all the components of the fuel cell and all the facilities under safeguards. Then they would train the workforce while setting up these safeguarded facilities, and that trained workforce would then go and build the unsafeguarded facilities. So you can see that the stuff is not hard to do, right? It's just that Pakistan got sanctioned very heavily and aggressively, but I imagine the Turks and Saudis are probably well into the process of collecting what they need in order to pull that off. So it's not even that. Like, they know that Pakistan's nuclear program is not big enough to support everybody. It's really tuned for India, and it's been constrained quite a bit, especially by the US, to ensure that it's limited to India. For example, Pakistan cannot buy uranium on the open market, right? So that really puts a hamper on our ability to expand our energy supply and even have an inert capability, even under safeguards. So even that has been limited quite a bit, right? So I don't think that's where the I think really for the Turks is that maybe I would say their biggest stakeholders are their defense industrialists, and they want a market. They know that their ability to penetrate NATO, although it's getting there, they're doing pretty good. They have obviously relationships with Leonardo in Italy, and they've obviously secured a Herjet sale with Spain, and they're making some inroads. But I think they also understand that really, like, NATO is dominated by some existing primes, that they're not going to easily let the Turkish aerospace industry or Turkish military defense industry enter that easily. So they need like big, safe, secure markets. And Pakistan, Saudi Arabia especially, but even Pakistan in cycles are good markets. And I think that's where this is coming from, is that each of these leaders provide a promise, like a very distinct promise to each of their domestic audiences. And those promises aren't the same. Like, they're all different promises, and they're all being sold a different message. And the only proof factor they have is this agreement. And they're going to likely hope, and this is again my most realistic, you can maybe say pessimistic take, I think they're just likely hoping that people just sort of forget about the agreement and nothing comes of it, and the situation stabilizes to the point where it doesn't have to be invoked, like that previous United Anti-Terror Alliance that Saudi Arabia set up, where General Raheel Sharif is still out there doing something. So basically, I think that's where this is likely going to head. It's probably modeled after the Saudi-Pakistan Defense Agreement, which again, as we saw, literally play out, didn't really manifest in what people were narrating. And we kind of, Asim and I cautioned that it was very unlikely that it was very likely this agreement, the previous agreement was made with the approval and knowledge of the US. And based on that, don't expect Pakistan to suddenly take like a forbearing role in Saudi defense matters. And there you go. It proved out, right? It literally proved out. And I would argue the same here. I'm just hoping personally that there is like a joint capacity building approach, which would be the best outcome, all things considered. And then I know some people might bring up other, I would say, strange examples of what this might be. So some people have a theory that it's like the agreement is actually some sort of vehicle that would allow Saudi Arabia to bring in Chinese weapons. And I'm like, this is where I get really personally annoyed at like the Pakistani like spooning of Chinese things, because it makes no sense on that basis. Because literally the Saudis want to industrialize. They want to build their own capacity. They want to be in a position where their industries are feeding into the manufacturing of jets that get exported globally. The only country that's willing to offer them that is Türkiye. It's not China. China just wants to sell, and you buy, right? You can speak to any country in the world that deals with China. And this is a relationship China wants to maintain with the whole world, which is why there is a significant global pushback against the Chinese from an economic standpoint, right? Now, obviously, like the Gulf has always been a good market for the Chinese because the Gulf being oil rich, right? Not having the incentives to industrialize for so many decades was a great buy market, right? They're a great consumer market. But now, definitely with the Saudis, I think with MBS and even the wider Saudi leadership, they are now thinking along different lines that they want to say, hey, look, we need to think about what will help our survival in the next 50 to 100, 200 years, right? Same with the UAE, same with Qatar. Like, all these countries have concluded that they cannot rely on just doling out benefits and grants to the population. They have to provide real opportunities, lasting opportunities, right? And that's where they're trying to figure out what the competitive strengths are. So when you're very energy rich, you have some strengths, like you can set up data centers and stuff for sure. But the other side is industrialization, where you leverage that energy to sort of partly subsidize the cost of manufacturing. But if you're going to do that, you can't do it in like consumer goods and stuff. You have to do it in like some real high capital, high technology, high complexity areas. And again, I hope that Pakistan, if there's some real stuff happening in this agreement involving capacity building, that we don't mess it up on our side, because I feel that we are the most predisposed to mess it up on our side. And I can bring up many different examples, but like a good one in my perspective is like, consider how we've underused NESCOM and the Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. Granted, there are many controls and sanctions and this and that, 100%. But forget about the branding and the institutions. Think about the people involved. Those people are skilled experts in their fields, right? Especially within the nuclear field. I mean, PAEC, literally CERN contracts PAEC to manufacture inputs like radiation shielding and stuff for their scientific and R&D programs. So clearly PAEC has people who understand a lot in the way of metallurgy, chemicals, and what have you, right? This is expertise that could be repurposed and reused horizontally in so many different industry applications. Similarly with NESCOM, we have a lot of people who understand flight controls, alloys, composites, all these things. These people could have been diffused across so many different institutions and organizations to help drive more horizontal development in our industries. And we don't do it, right? And it's usually a mix of factors like overbearing bureaucratic controls, which are like kind of date back to the time of the British, were never really updated and reformed in accordance with current issues. Lack of top-down interest. We just don't have enough nation building, or we don't have enough people with nation building mentality, frankly. If you look in India, they're dreaming about the United, I don't want to mispronounce it, but let's call it AB, right? United, let's just call it A Bharat, right? Basically, Akhand Bharat, I think was what it was, but basically, yeah. Now we in Pakistan mock it and make fun of it, but the thing is, that is a vision that they've sold to their leaders and their people, and they work according to it, right? It's not an issue of whether they achieve it or not. The issue is that it's a vision that's tangible, it's ambitious, it's a mentality of them wanting to make India a global power, and they work towards it, and it kind of goes downstream for there. Everyone sort of gets in line, and you see the results. In Pakistan, it's literally the opposite. It's like, how do we support this guy? How do we support those guys? How do we support China? How do we support Saudi? Like, it's never about how do I build a nation, a civilization, it's a presence, and take control over my domain, right? And yes, today, if you say Pakistan should be the preeminent power in West Asia or South, let's say East, South, let's say on the east side of the Middle East, like Pakistan should be the preeminent power in Central Asia, in South Asia, and what have you in the Middle East. We should have a presence in the Arabian Sea. Nothing should flow to India without our approval. Just say that, just state that as a goal. You're not, obviously everyone knows you don't have the capacity to enforce it yet. But if you make that the goal, then that you basically have set a mentality where you tell everyone this is what we're working towards. And then you build towards that. And it's going to take decades and decades and decades, right? And then, yeah, people in India are going to be like, they're going to make fun of you. So, like, no, they're going to say, like, get back to your, no, basically go back to your class, right? But that's not the point. The point is that we're going to set the goal and we will get there. And that's the mentality that we lack. That is the issue. And it goes downstream from there. And you can just see it. Like, you can just see how we mediated in the Iran issue and all that have you. You can literally see that this is not the mentality we should have, right? This is not the approach, right? You should not be the mediator, right? You should be the enforcer. You should say, look, we're not going to tolerate any instability in our region because it causes a trade issue. So we are going to insert ourselves in this conflict now in a different way. We're going to secure our trading. We're going to not accept any tolls and what have you on the Strait of Hormuz, and we're going to help enforce it. That could be one position you take, or you take a different position, right? You say, look, we believe that all the countries in the region need to take their own security and guarantee their own thing, and we should all build capacity towards it. So we all need to industrialize. We need to become a central block to counterbalance the East and the West. That could be another approach. And these are tangible approaches, which require, of course, you have neighbors and stuff. You have to negotiate with them. You have to sort of come to a common agreement. But that's how the Europeans got to the EU, right? It wasn't from 0 to 100. They had the European Economic Committee. They had different organizations and different initiatives, and it took step by step they got there. Or you enforce and establish a vision and you just go and implement it. Problem is that we're in this netherland of not doing anything and not offering anything that anyone wants, and that is affecting us now more, especially in recent years. It's affecting Pakistan in a lot worse ways than you can imagine. And I think over time is going to start revealing itself in the next few months, unfortunately. So, Arslan, any concluding thoughts on this?
No, I think that sort of covers it quite well. Hopefully it is an alliance of industry building, because that would genuinely work quite well for the three of them. But I've learned to expect the worst, and hopefully I will feel good about the outcome as opposed to expecting the best.
Yeah, so what we're doing here is we're going to keep our expectations like really low.
Really low.
Actually, yeah. So everyone, like, we're not being pessimistic. We're just keeping our expectations so low that anything above it will be great.
My heart can't take any more. Anything works.
Like, we have been aged by 50 years because of Pakistan, basically.
I've seen guys talking about a pooled defense budget. So Pakistan gets more money to defend.
I have the optimistic approach. It should not be, obviously not a shared defense budget, because we're just gonna we're that kid, we're that guy. It's just gonna, obviously it's gonna, that idea obviously tilt towards us. But there are things that, for example, the EU has done or NATO has done on its part, like the SAFE mechanism, where it's a shared financing pool, and it works in different ways. So it's not just the country that uses it as a loan system for financing the procurement, which Poland does. I think Poland's the number one user right now of that mechanism. Surprisingly, you'd think it would be Ukraine, but I think Poland's number one. Might be wrong, but yeah, Poland, Ukraine. But the other side is that it helps the industries expand. So so you could have, for example, a SAFE style mechanism in this agreement. Again, there's no provision. So this is what we're talking about: lack of nation building. We're offering the ideas here, but you could have such a provision, such a system where it's backed by Saudi money. And besides doling out loans to Pakistan to go and import whatever equipment, it could also involve investment to Pakistani companies. It can involve investing into NESCOM and other startup, or maybe even new startups and entities that can help industrialize Pakistan so that it becomes more of a contributor over time. And that's another mechanism. That's another way of approaching it. So these are all ideas that could be on the table, right? And I think of all the three, it's really Saudi Arabia and Turkey who will be the most active in engaging and talking about these things. I don't feel like on the Pakistani side we have that caliber yet.
Yeah. And if worse comes to it, I'm sure, as you guys saw, or maybe you haven't seen, but Egypt was blocked from joining the Pact because that would have been you can only have one Pakistan in the club. Oh,
guys.
yeah, that's exactly
we already have a Pakistan. We don't need to.
Is Saudi sources increasingly see Egypt as an unreliable aid-dependent partner with limited strategic and military value. They don't want another Pakistan in this.
One potential entrant, and this is again because the interoperability is there, I think they would probably target Qatar next. I think because with Qatar, you have, again, a very strong fiscal player. They also have, speaking of SAFE, They actually have a funding entity. I think it's called the Barzam Holdings or something.
Yeah, Barzan Holdings.
And they do this kind of work. It's
like, actually, don't they finance third country acquisitions as well?
Yeah, they did. So Qatar pumped the loan for, I think, one of Indonesia's like naval programs.
Yeah.
And then I think the builder was a Turkish company. So that framework, so like a safe style framework already exists. And I think it wouldn't surprise me that Qatar is actually the next entrant here. Obviously, they have to play it careful because they have unrelated air base and that kind of stuff. I think, and that's the reason why I think the fact is like this is not going to be in contravention with America, is because if you want to bring Qatar in, you're going to need America's approval, right? Literally, like America's central command's there. So I think in that sense, that's probably their next target. And then now you have Qatar's holdings and sovereign wealth fund, which already engages in kind of stuff. And then the next component, which is again, this is where Pakistan's failing comes. We have to open up Pakistan. Like Pakistan has to open up. It cannot operate like a closed market for this to work. It cannot be like a black box. Sorry? Yep. Yeah. But like the point being is that like any Qatari Saudi investment group, they're going to want to invest in something like NESCOM or PAEC or NDC.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah, they'll have to deal with the sanctions and control, and they can that stuff can get rebuilt and redone. But they want access to the gold, right? That's the issue, and they're going to tell you that we know that your best people, your best infrastructure, your best capacity is inaccessible to us, and that's not acceptable. So you have to open it, and that's going to be. And if this is serious, that's going to be the conversation. But I don't think, as you said, chances are it might not be serious enough. So next topic, speaking of downstream impacts, and this one's going to bite a little bit. So India issued a request for information for basically a new lead-in fighter trainer. They might require up to 150 aircraft to replace their current BAE Hawk Mark 132s. They basically require these new trainers for training their 4+ 5th gen and future 6th gen pilots or fighter pilots. The likely bidders include, obviously, you have Korea Aerospace Industries, the T-50. You have, obviously, United Aircraft Corporation from Russia with the Yak 130. You got Boeing with the T-7A or Boeing and Saab. And then you have Leonardo with the M-346FA, which is going to sting for those of you who have followed us long enough and followed the Pakistan defense circuit long enough. So, Arslan, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, for the longest of time, I think it's been nearly 20 years since the Pakistan Air Force has been looking for a lift platform. It's been nearly 20 years, and we've not got a lift platform. Originally, I believe we looked into the M346 and the Italians pushed it very heavily. We also looked into the T-50 from Korea, and it was deemed too expensive and it overlapped too much with the JF-17. We looked into the L-15, but it didn't meet the requirements, which is why the Chinese came up with the L-15B to meet the PAF requirements. And in the end, we did nothing. We went nowhere. Nothing has happened with that. And we keep making this mistake. And we've been talking about this a lot. Is we keep pushing the top. We're very top heavy. Like the Pakistan Air Force was really investing into the tip of the spear. But then it's like making this like really sharp, lethal like tip of the spear and then attaching it to a toothpick. Because the back end, we're here in a place where where the forces are talking about 5th generation fighters and all this sort of stuff. But then we're still operating 3rd gen, Mirages and F7s. We're still operating K8s and T-37s. For how long can we do this? So it's just another case of we're losing access to more and more options as time goes on because the Indians will take them. There was another example, BriteCloud, great system. It was offered, the Leonardo developed it and designed it had integrated into the J-17. We didn't take it up. It's now on the F-35. Will we get access to that again? No. The A-Data, Leonardo, they privately funded the integration into the JF-17. We didn't take up demo on all these joint development and joint production offers, went to the UAE. Their engineers and all those guys jumped ship to the UAE. So, we're missing so many opportunities. We missed so many opportunities and we'll carry on missing these opportunities as now, as I said, we're seeing now the Indians will end up probably picking one of the ones that we wanted anyway. I think I'll throw it back over to you to give some more context on the program.
Yeah, so the Pakistan Air Force has been looking into a lift. So basically, just for context, a lead-in fighter trainer is essentially and this is where it's even hard to explain in the PAF's parlance because the PAF is so behind in this respect. But basically, think of it as a intermediary between your fighter conversion unit and your operational conversion unit. So this is the unit that essentially literally trains a fighter qualified pilot on the operational procedures and requirements of the Air Force at that moment in time. So for example, this is where you learn air-to-air refueling. This is where you will learn precision-guided munitions. This is where you would learn BVR. This is where you would learn tactical data link-based workflows. In the future, it'll involve learning manned-unmanned teaming. You might even do maybe not your new pilots, but maybe what happens is basically your more senior pilots before they retire, they might go back to the LIFT unit and become a dissimilar air combat training unit. So this one concept is that you have obviously combat commander school, which does this work. But the other idea is you would have the LIFT unit literally going around the country and training different squadrons, right, through DACT operations. So basically the idea is that it's this intermediary that sits between the two. But then what was also happening in NATO and in India and in China, interestingly, is that basically where your basic and your intermediary are being sort of consolidated down and simplified. And a lot more of the work is being pushed into what they call LVC. So it's like, I think it was called live virtual construction, or live virtual and constructive training. So basically, this is where you offload towards simulators and basically on the ground mechanism systems to help with familiarity and all that kind of stuff. And then you spend, let's say, relatively speaking, a less amount of time on the crewed aircraft, on the actual real world aircraft itself. But the point being is that it would still be the same hours as, let's say, your preceding platforms. But the point is that you're just going to be doing a lot more training on the ground, because there's so many more workflows involved, basically. And then you have your normal in-air training as well. But the point being is that these systems have been consolidated down. So you typically have essentially your very basic trainer, which it uses like a turboprop at this point. It's like a side-by-side seater, very similar to Super Mushshak, but obviously a bit more powerful, a bit lighter, a bit more let's say a bit more maneuverable to sort of get you into the not firefighting, but let's say get you into the more advanced flying stuff earlier. Then your next phase would be like either a turboprop powered or a Honeywell style light turbofan powered jet trainer, very similar to like the K8. So you can imagine, so you're basically jumping from your basic trainer all the way up to K8 class trainer, either a turboprop version like your Embraer Super Tucano, or your A29, or your Turkish Turkish, or let's say a K or an L39NG or a K8 NG, for example. And then from there you go into LIFT. Like literally it's like 1, 2, 3. And in between all these, you rely very heavily on LVC training to sort of bridge in the gaps. So that is the approach. Now, the thing is, the PAF, we don't have that. We have a very different model. We have like this weird mix of, we have Super Mushshak at the beginning. Then if I recall correctly, there's a bit of a weird mix with the T-37s and the K8s. And you have the K8s again, and then you go on to FT7Ps basically. And then from there, people go on to like their OCUs essentially, from what I understand. They had like a shooter squadron lift thing, which was again an FT7P unit. But so the point being, is very disjointed and ad hoc compared to where the rest of the world is going. And this is a huge problem, because we can't have the discussion both ways. We can't say that it's not the plane, it's the man in the plane, or it's not the gun, it's the man behind the gun, right? It's our training, it's our this, it's our that, and then not have the training, right? Like at some point, because the problem runs downstream. If you recall, the PF has traditionally been a place where other air forces would send their personnel for training. If we don't have the equipment that they have at the same standard, then why would they come to us for training? That's number one, right? Number two, it makes it harder in the long run to provision pilots, especially younger pilots, for the next gen platforms. Because the way the system within the PAF itself, but also in other countries, has moved is that you basically have career pilots on one platform. It's very rare, or let's say not very rare, but it's much more uncommon for people to platform hop. Even within the PAF, I remember at the time, there's an interview with Air Chief Marshal Soleiman, which he was basically saying that he was getting pilots as junior as flying officer on the F-16 via the OCU unit, the ADFs, the Block 15 ADF units, so that they would be able to operate on the F-16s for much longer, right? So you start on F-16 and you persist throughout your career on the F-16, however long that goes. You start on the JF-17, you persist on the JF-17. And one of the interesting things about the JF-17 and J-10s is that, I don't know if folks know this, but like your helmet mounted display system, the underlying helmet itself has to be custom made for your head, meaning that is made purpose built for you. Literally, the helmet mounted display is made for you. So you're going to take this unit from the Block 3 to J, like you're going to either stay on the Block 3 or you're going to take it between the Block 3 and the J-10, right? So the point being is that, and as you can imagine, it'll be very similar for those who get assigned to the J-35. You're going to have this one unit for life, right? Or for the duration of your career. So the point being is that this is the system that the world is moving towards. And unfortunately, despite a lot of and this is where it gets very unfortunate, despite a lot of talk, we don't see material action on the ground towards this so-called next generation Air Force. Like, we see some things on the margins. You see the J-10 induction, which wasn't even framed as a next generation induction. That was done in, that was this, the J-10C was evaluated in the mid 2010s as part of a +1 requirement in place of the F-16. So, because the F-16 program fell through at that time. So basically it was not even imagined as this next generation thing. It was meant to be as like the next fighter you need to start replacing your old fighters, basically. And then suddenly the narrative sort of spun it into something that it wasn't meant to be. You can ask the People's Liberation Army Air Force what they think about the J-10. It's not the same way that we think about the J-10. And there's a reason for that, right? So that's one problem. The other problem is that you need the personnel to know how to manage these workflows. So even if you go and, let's say you induct several squadrons with next gen stealth fighter, let's say you have all active ESA equipped radar J-17s, we can't go around saying that our training is so good when we're not spending nearly as much time as other countries on these workflows because we lack the systems for it. We cannot have this argument. Like, we cannot claim that. Like literally the Turks and the other Saudis and the Qataris would be spending exponentially more time doing BVR workflows than us because of their environment. So how are we turning around and saying that we know BVR better than them, right? Yes, it was true that we did know BVR better than them, right? Or let's say data link led BVR operations. So where you have an AWACS that would pick up your extended range targets and start charting out the assignments to the fighter. Yes, we had that lead for a while, but I assure you that unless we change and evolve our training system, we're not going to have that. And the thing is, the PAF itself recognized this. So I remember when I was at Ideas in 2018, the big buzz, surprisingly, was the lead-in fighter training program. Because at that time, Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Al-Mukhan essentially said that he is looking for a lead-in fighter trainer, and he's decided it needs to have certain capabilities. He was expecting a multi-mode radar, ideally active ESA. He was expecting it to be integrated with a tactical data link system. So again, like all the things that our fourth gen fighters already had, this and more, it was supposed to already have it. And obviously the options back then, and he said an afterburning engine would be preferred, but not necessary. So he kept the door open. But the AVIC came with the L-15B, which was, I believe, is the afterburning variant of the AI 322 series from Ukraine. So the point being is that the vendors came in, and really the deal essentially would boil down to either the L-15B or the M-346FA. And I remember speaking to the AVIC guy, and he said that we're hoping to get the contract. So he confirmed the deal was real, but he said it hasn't been finalized, meaning that the bidding was still open between Leonardo and AVIC. And now we fast forward nearly 10 years later, so 8 years, and now we have Leonardo probably bidding or definitely bidding for the Indian requirement. And it would not surprise me, true to form, that maybe not the Indian Air Force, I think they will always look for the best technical package, but let's say the Indian Ministry of Defense and the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs are going to love wanting to take up Leonardo right now so that they can dissuade any further engagement between Leonardo and Pakistan. And just to echo an earlier point with Arslan that Arslan made. So the BriteCloud. So just if you're not aware, the BriteCloud was this like basically dispensable, integrated, active ESA-based electronic countermeasure system. So basically you can insert them into your chaff and flare dispenser. And when you're in operations, it would just basically eject them and basically create these like gliding decoys, essentially. That would essentially create a lot of problems for legacy active radar air-to-air missiles, basically, or active radar guided air-to-air missiles. So things like the Meteor, Micah, R-77, they would have had a lot of difficulty against these things because these things would have been like decoys, essentially. And they would have essentially forced a lot of expenditure of missiles. And then what happened was initially Leonardo was actually marketing this to Pakistan. So Leonardo was marketing this with the Grifo-E active ESA radar, which is like a gallium nitride radar for the J-17 Block 3. They were also basically, not them, but another Italian company, Elettronica, were basically marketing the integrated electronic countermeasure suite for the J-17. And obviously all three went to China. But the thing was that the big critique, and I remember the refrain that people had was that the Grifo radar was good, but we couldn't integrate Chinese air-to-air missiles to it. And the question we always had, and it's like, why not talk to the Turks, maybe? Like, why not talk to the South Africans, or maybe why not develop one ourselves? And this is the problem that we have with the Pakistan procurement cycle, is that it just suddenly cuts straight to China, right? And we never have the other conversations of the alternatives. When The strength of our Air Force was built on things like original design, doing custom work, owning our own architecture. Like Link 17 was not Chinese. We built Link 17 in Pakistan. Now, if you applied the mentality we've been seeing as of late, we wouldn't even have Link 17. We'd have like Link C or whatever, right, from China. So this is the issue that we are dealing with here in a broad sense, which has become concerning and now is going to start biting us. Because it's not just going to be Leonardo. Eventually, it'll be this domino effect of other vendors that we have worked with traditionally, like a Saab, right, like a Elettronica, like a Hensoldt, right, like a Leonardo, obviously, and even medium-sized ones, smaller ones, that like Indra from Spain, that are suddenly going to start more and more leaning to India because despite Pakistan having recurrent multi-billion-dollar procurement cycles, the market is closed. It's a black box. And I know some folks will be like, well, China offers us everything in the world and costs are good. And we had these conversations before on the podcast where this is not the correct mentality for these things. We should have the best solution that not only we're able to use, but we're able to open up, able to integrate, able to customize, and able to also integrate within our industry and also have our industry involved with those OEMs so that we can sell things back to them, so that we can expand our own economy, right? We want the full package. We want the India style package. Now, obviously, we're not going to match India in every single aspect. We're not going to match the dollar terms. But for the vendors that we do have relationships with, we should be able to do something like that. And the thing is, we constantly deny ourselves this, and it's like it's a constant story at this point, and it's become concerning. It always was, but now it's become actively concerning because now we might lose, or we could be at risk of losing one of our most dependable suppliers to this point, which is Leonardo.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems, and obviously, look, I understand the reality is that Pakistan isn't necessarily able to do stuff like our developers' own programs and whatnot. But I think the biggest issue, the biggest thing we lack is forward thinking and vision, right? We tend to make procurements quite either very very last minute, or we'll like start evaluating them like decades before, and then something will happen, we won't be able to buy it, and then decades down the line we end up buying it. But we lack this like vision, we lack this forward-looking approach. For example, the Italians, they offered us 2 radar packages, right? There was the Vixen from the Gripen-E, and then there was the Grifo. Now, obviously, yeah, as you said, the issue was the air-to-air missile problem, but the Italians are like the A team of missile development in Europe. You've got the French, the Italians, and then you've got like the British and the Germans. So you've got like different within Europe. You've got like the 2 tiers, and the Italians are like the A team. They're the top tier of like missile developers. And some people might find this ridiculous, or whatever. But the CAMM-ER was an Italian project, right? It was a wholly Italian project. And on the market, there was only from Europe, there was only the Meteor or the Mk available for sale. And it was quite interesting. Like there's an opportunity there, right, where the Germans have a veto power on the Meteor, and then the French, and so do the French, and then the French obviously have the Mk. But there's no like veto-free, like nonsense-free missile option available from Europe. However, this would have been like prime opportunity for Pakistan to do what the Poles did with the Brits, and take the CAM and turn it into a family of missiles. Like the Poles now, and they took CAM, they turned it into CAMM-ER, and then CAMM-LR. I can't remember, but CAMM-ER for sure. You'll say, okay, well, why not just buy CAM? But then why not just buy the original? The ASRAM, that's it. The ASRAM. Obviously, that's a British thing, but the CAMM-ER was Italian, wholly Italian, radar guided missile. We could have, and this is where like the forward thinking part comes in. What was stopping us from potentially evaluating options like that, where in the long term, where maybe because the Block 3 was always an interim, right? It was never going to be the final iteration of the JF-17. It was always going to be another Block 4 or whatever the next one is, PFX, whatever you want to call it. So there was always going to be avenue for future development, for something in the future. So now with the PFX, for example, they've got this like thing about FARs and these domestic missiles, which are just repackaged PL-12s. This is something that should have been initiated years ago. And this is something we could have worked on with Italy in developing an air-to-air missile based around the CAMM-ER, for example, or building them at home for the tri-services, because the PAF, the PN, and the PA all had this overlapping medium-range SAM and short-range SAM requirement. So you could have fulfilled all of that and an air-to-air missile requirement and more with the same platform. But this is the kind of disjointed thinking we have. That there's no, and this is where like India is like good and bad, where the Ministry of Defense can force certain decisions on the on the Air Force and the Navy and on their armed forces, right? But whereas the forces might not want it, but if the MOD says you want it, you're going to get it. They're going to get it, right? And we lack that in Pakistan. We could have easily had a unified missile program between the tri-services and have that scale and that forward thinking.
But like, to be clear, look, there's always a space where you want to bring the Chinese in. And the way I look at it is that if you understand the strength that the Chinese offer, play into that. So the Chinese will give you a solution that works out of the box, right? So you get the J10 and you get the PL15. I think in that context, yes, go for the J10 with the PL15. It works, it's good, it's proven, let's go for it. And let's drive those costs down as much as possible, get the best deal, and move ahead. That's how the maybe not the IAF, but maybe the way the Indian government sort of approached their dealings with Russia, which is like get the thing that works, the package, and move it through. And then in the middle you have like other stakeholders come in and sort of like mess it up a little bit with customizations and delays and what have you. But if you have a partner like China or America, you should buy the system lock, stock, and barrel in that context. Now, what works for the J10 does not need to be enforced on the JF-17. I think like what they did was they sort of packaged them together. But the way I would have looked at it was like, look, if I am buying the J10 with the PL15, that should be my stopgap in the sense that whatever delays or work or whatever, like let's say delays or issues occur with having to further customize the JF-17, I will lean on the J10 to hold the ground. I know that it's going to work. It's a pre-built package. Meanwhile, on the JF-17, which is a platform that I co-invested in, that I co-produce, that I want to develop more domestic expertise on, I am going to customize it to my exact will. So I'm going to pick the radar that I like. I think some PF evaluators really preferred the Leonardo radar. It was more modern. The Grifo-E was gallium nitride compared to the gallium arsenic KLJ-7A. And then in terms of like let's say like original air-to-air missile program or the wider family of missiles, like that's a conversation you could not just with Italy, you could have had that with South Africa. Again, from 2016 to I would say like from 2014 to 2017, Denel was trying to market these solutions and the program, the R&D capabilities and the joint ventures to Pakistan. And then we did actually finally get a breakthrough. It was like in 2017 where NESCOM finally had some sort of engagement with Denel, but by that point, the UAE's Edge Group stepped in and took over all of Denel's people. And that's where it was too late at that point. We should have moved in earlier. And this goes to my next point, is that when you dig into the Pakistan's military procurement system and R&D systems and what have you, you understand is that the name does not mean anything. Meaning PAEC is not, despite being the main entity that works on aircraft maintenance and production, is not necessarily the best position to do aircraft or aerospace R&D. In reality, the best one is NESCOM. And NESCOM has its issues as well, for sure. But I mean, CNMI discussed it, and there are a lot of blockers to being able to engage with NESCOM, which is because it reports back to the Strategic Plans Division and all these very overbearing security controls, which again, we can argue that you could reform the system such that the more conventional oriented aspects of NESCOM's work could be broken out into new entities that can then work with these companies. So for example, you would have people who understand air-to-air missiles and surface-to-air missiles, at least conceptually and from an engineering standpoint within NESCOM, definitely more so than PAEC. And they would have been the ones that would work with an MBDA Italy or a Denel in South Africa to be able to develop these solutions for Pakistan, right? And that is the issue that we have here, is that again, the country's decision-making systems are relying on mechanisms that have long expired in their applicability to the way things work today, right? It's like someone who has never, not to give any names, but someone who has never built their own job, right? And this is in reference to, let's say, a certain class of people in Pakistan, like certain people who have never built their own jobs. They never had to stand up in line for anything. They never had to go through any formal evaluation process. I have decided that freelancers in Pakistan should pay an elevated tax rate. Why? Because they earn money. Like no understanding of economics, no understanding of why those Pakistanis have to do freelance work, no understanding of the fact that those Pakistanis are bringing in hard currency, no understanding of any of that. But the person who has had everything handed down to them is going to decide how much more the middle class needs to pay. And when this is the mentality that's running procurement, now this is the mentality that's unfortunately running procurement, R&D, and other aspects. And we are bleeding. Pakistan is bleeding skilled people, right? Asim is literally that guy, right? He is an aerospace engineer who has worked in Pakistan, and now he's in America. And I can give you dozens of other people dozens of names of people who have left Pakistan, not because of the money or anything, but because of this culture, this system, and
Yeah.
more want to leave. And that's the issue. And now we're on the cusp of losing many of our best partners over decades who helped us build our customized stacks, because we are increasingly weighing towards what's easy and quick without understanding the wider systems that allow us to do what we can. So for example, it goes back to the earlier critique we had of why is Arslan, but why are these Kuwa guys so pro-West? Like, dudes, my people, brothers and sisters, our foreign currency generation comes from the West. This is the money that we earn in order to buy from China. If we want to earn more of the money, we need to build better relationships with the people who give us the money, right?
Not
This is the
only
issue.
that, but the Chinese, they may hold a lot of weight economically, but in terms of like narratives and politics, they're irrelevant, right? Like, for example, we've seen Balochistan, right? It's been like 10 years and the Chinese haven't been able to do anything for narrative building, for example. Whereas if tomorrow the states decided that they wanted to invest in some mineral projects in Balochistan, I guarantee there would not be a single pro-BLA figure in the West. All of these safe havens in the UK and the
It's funny, like in the most dumbest possible way, it was America that gave Gwadar business.
Yeah, like, honestly, yeah, that's also quite true, isn't it?
Like the dumbest way, it took Trump to get his business in Gwadar. Like that's where we've come to, right? Like, what was China doing the last 15 years? We're just being facetious here, just joking.
Yeah. But there is method behind the madness, and we don't get paid by the Americans or the West, unfortunately. There's
or China or Pakistan, unfortunately. We don't get paid by anyone.
There's no incentive for us to lean one way or the other. It's purely just what we think would be best for the country, because we've seen the current system isn't working. The current system is failing. The country is on fire, and nothing. Just everything.
Actually, I'll give you a very practical, grounded policy example. So Pakistan's government is really trying to make sure that the GSP Plus scheme with Europe continues. Yeah. Now, I'm wondering at the back of my head here, man, if I really wanted to get these EU lawmakers to really back not just a renewal, but like a very thorough expansion of GSP Plus with Pakistan, what could I offer them? I wonder if there's a defense procurement item I could offer them.
That also, yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, because it works. The EU is like, in some respects, very similar to the States, right? You have to like win over multiple stakeholders in different regions. You have an EU parliament, right? And then you have obviously the regional heads, let's say the independent sovereigns of the different countries. But this is where, and we're gonna go through some Q&As later, where we were talking about the Typhoon. But like, obviously, the Typhoon is not a tenable option for different reasons. But let's say we dial back to 2015 when we were evaluating the Typhoon, that perhaps prioritizing the Typhoon, yes, being more costly, yes, having the Western issues, yes, all that would have gotten us in the door with some level of respect with the EU to get an expanded GSP case. Now, when the GSP stuff gets expanded, then our ability to export things to Europe goes up. If we had done a very good offset technology partnership deal involving arms procurement, perhaps some of our horizontal industries, like let's say our upstream manufacturing and proper industries, like high value industries, get some investment and growth. If we'd done our own work in Pakistan, instead of, in the way of developing our industries and creating higher value exports and horizontally diffusing things that have been learned in different places like PAEC across other sectors, we'd have much stronger capacity to export as well, high value goods. We move up the value chain, and at the same time, we'd get regulators to sort of give us more concessions to be able to export those higher value items. And just to be clear, I'll give you another example. So, I've been speaking to like a half dozen Pakistani defense startups. So there's been this wellspring of Pakistani companies that have entered defense, and I'll tell you, not a single one of them is getting any sort of state support. And the reason why they're able to fund whatever projects they're doing for the armed forces right now, there's one company, for example, is working very closely with the Pakistan Army on some drone interceptor stuff. There's another company that's working very closely with the Pakistan Navy. I think people are aware of that company, but in any case, the point being is that, and there's at least 4 other companies I know, and all of them have one thing in common, without a doubt. And the one thing in common is that they all export to the European Union. Not a single one exports to China. So they earn their money by exporting whatever technology services and know-how or whatever they're making or supporting engineering services and what have you to Europe. And with whatever little money they can put together after their costs and overhead, they're putting it towards investing in Pakistan's defense sector. And it's such a sad story that people have to bootstrap and do their own thing, and then they have such relatively outsized impacts, right? And we're kind of going on a soapbox about Kuwa here, but the point being is that we're all like brethren here and siblings in the sense that we all come from the same sort of thing. We all made our business in other areas, nothing to do with Pakistan. We made our money overseas, and now we're like sort of reinvesting it back into these initiatives in the hopes of engaging our native home market, and we get zero support, right? And the same for these startups, zero support, right? Except for the one that actually is working with the Pakistan Army, but again, it's at a mid-level, right? This is the issue. It's not like a top-down, no, it's like someone in the middle, because of the ongoing issues in Balochistan and the tribal areas, decided to take the initiative and start developing a solution to protect the soldiers. And that's what's driving this work right now. But who knows, right? It might just get packaged and sent to China. And this is the issue. This is the issue, right? And this is why we are so critical. Like, as I said, look, it's not an anti-China thing. Leverage China for what they offer in terms of their strengths, but don't lean on them to help you with everything. You need the rest of the world for that. And that's really what we're trying to say here. And the reason why we sort of go on a Western bent a lot is because the narratives are dominated by China and Pakistan. This is the issue. So someone has to sort of give a counterpoint. And this is us, basically. All right. Now into some audience questions. So just to be clear to people, because I know in the comments we're going to get folks be like, well, these guys are talking about these things. These are questions from our audience, right? We're going to sort of engage with people. We don't necessarily agree with the premises or the ideas and what have you, but the point is sort of to drive a good, healthy discourse on defense. I think it's worthwhile. There are not a lot of avenues for people to sort of unpack some good ideas and get them and to sort of assess them. So I think there's a lot of value in that. And that's what this section is for. So the first question...
You can start and then I'll try to get where I can.
Yeah, so the first question is from Walid. So what tactical data link and command and control systems do the Pakistan Air Force, Navy, and Army currently operate? And which platforms and sensors are connected to each network? Can Link 17, Link Green, and any Pakistan Army network exchange surveillance, targeting, and engagement data directly? Or does Pakistan rely on gateways, command centers, voice communications, and other manual processes to coordinate joint operations, real joint operations such as national air defense, close air support, maritime strike, or fleet protection? How would a target detected by one service be tracked, assigned, and engaged by another? And has Pakistan publicly demonstrated this level of integration? So the short answer really is, at least to my knowledge, we don't have a tri-services C4ISR system as of yet. These things have been segmented between each of the tri-services. There is a shared situational awareness capability through the regional air and maritime picture, but I'm not sure to what degree it hooks into anything in terms of air defense management and what have you. I know I've heard, for example, Arslan, you can correct me, but I've heard of situations where the Pakistan Army and Air Force sort of have to coordinate their air movements to ensure that their air defense systems don't cause like fratricide, essentially. So it tells you that the level of communication and the level of interoperability is still somewhat dependent on manual processes in the middle. That being said, when you look through GIDS's Global Industrial Defense Solutions, which is basically the commercial wing of NESCOM, when you look through the product brochures, you're going to see more and more types of network-enabled warfare systems. Like you have like the PAC fire artillery system. You obviously have like Nexus, the network information exchange system with the Pakistan Navy, and so on. So the idea is that I think definitely within each of the individual tri-services, they do take their own network-enabled warfare capability very seriously, but we haven't quite got to the most, like, let's say an American level, US level, or UK level of cross-services interoperability and having a shared communication line, because we don't do combined arms maneuvers to that degree, to that tactical level. At best, we might have a Navy Air Force maneuver. So the Navy and Air Force, I believe they do have a tighter level of interoperability. And the proof for that being is that until they were retired, the Curriculum Eagles AWACS systems, they were directly operated with the Navy, right? The Navy would essentially communicate with them. I remember even old Link Green promotional material actually showcasing that AWACS system within the material itself. So, and obviously they had multiple exercises to sort of validate the capability. And obviously you have the PAF Mirages have to sort of operate with the Navy as well for the maritime air cover and standoff range attack capability. But between the Pakistan Air Force and the Pakistan Army, I would argue now, actually less, like it was much more, it was rudimentary, but it was there during the counterinsurgency days in the late 2000s, early 2010s. It has seemed to they've walked it back quite a bit, with the Army preferring to even take control more of its own strike capabilities, as we saw with Army Rocket Force Command. However, there might be some scope for cross-services integration in some areas. So on Kuwa, we have like an article where basically I have a chart where you have each of your services like as columns. So you have your Pakistan Army, Navy, and Air Force. But then as rows, you have these like shared, I don't know what to call them. I call them subservice commands, where you have like, for example, Pakistan Air Force's Space Command. So the Pakistan Air Force is the steward of the military satellites, whether it's reconnaissance, communication, doesn't matter. It's the Pakistan Air Force that has opted to manage them. But these satellite systems do have to connect at some level directly to the Army so that Rocket Force Command can work. They do have to connect at some level with the Navy for their operations. So there is the sense that, okay, like maybe Space Command, even though it's stewarded by the PAF, does involve a tighter level of interoperability between the three surfaces because of the necessity of the work, right? And the most recent Ministry of Defense production publication basically had something about so basically the Pakistan Army had developed something called the Integrated Battlefield Management System. So they already have an integrated battle management system, or the IBMS. This thing was called the IBFMS, right? So it was like one tier above, it seemed. So it could be that they've already sort of, in those specific domains, have already sort of worked towards it and are beginning to operationalize, because it's just necessary. Like Army Rocket Force Command cannot do its job without imaging intelligence, right? So I think that direction is there, but to the extent of like really thorough combined arms maneuvers where you'd have like Army aviation Z-10s coordinating with like JF-17s or later J-35s or whatever. So with the J-35s doing some long range strikes, and then the Z-10s sort of doing nap of the earth operations and firing low altitude cruise missiles at the same target. Like we're not there yet. And I'm not sure if we will ever be, given just the way things are sort of shake out these days. But who knows? Maybe if the institution of the CDF outlives the people, maybe a future CDF might come and start to sort of bring these things together. Any thoughts, Arslan?
No, I think you summarized it pretty well. It's one of those things where there's not a ton of information available publicly, so it's we're quite limited in what we can talk about.
Yeah. So this is basically what we have available, basically, is what we can speak to. Next question by Omar. Could a sufficiently large, potentially Saudi-financed Typhoon acquisition, here we go, Arslan, the best questions. Now we're talking. Overcome German and consortium-level political restrictions, give the PF meaningful freedom to integrate Pakistani and Turkish weapon systems and subsystems, and create useful commonality with Saudi Arabia and Turkey. My man, I hope you work for the PAF. Please tell me you work for the PF. Would a new force of Typhoons or used Typhoons provide a valuable and affordable replacement for the Mirage fleet, including its conventional strike and bomb truck roles, or would the operating cost or export restrictions and fleet complexity make an expanded J-17 force or another solution more practical? Would acquiring the J-35 lock the PF into the wider Chinese combat ecosystem, including Chinese AWAC aircraft, weapons, sensors, and data links? Or could Pakistan use indigenous and Turkish systems to integrate the J-35, J-10CE, F-16 ERI Typhoon? Well, man, he's got both of them in here, man. This is amazing.
Everything.
I love this guy. I wish Omar future J-17 variants into one sovereign combat network. What do you think, Arslan?
Okay, so I think to the first point, I think we saw one of the biggest objections with the Turks was the Germans, right? The Germans had continuously objected to the Turkish Eurofighter, but also the French had objected to Turkish Meteor access, but both of them ended up giving way. And what it was, I think what it was here was a lot of British lobbying. Now, the reason, and this is something I wanted to talk about earlier, was, and this was a really good opportunity that we missed, or maybe we've not necessarily missed yet. The British production line had gone idle. There was no further orders from the UK, and there was no aircraft further slated by the UK to be produced on that production line. So they would have had to make a lot of layoffs. They would have had to freeze the production line. It would have basically meant a loss of capability for the UK, right? So what they really, really needed a Typhoon buyer. Like they were desperate to find somebody to buy it, whether it's the RAF, and if there wasn't the RAF, a foreign customer. And they found that in Turkey. But because of that, the Turks, obviously, as I said, they were being blocked by the French and the Germans. But the Brits really needed this. This was really, really important for the Brits to be able to get running. And what happened in the end is all of these objections suddenly disappeared, and the Brits got their production line. They got what they needed. The Turks got a good deal, and they got what they needed, and now they're fine. But obviously, this is a short-term bandage, right? Like it's just a bandage on top of the wound. After the Turkish order is done, somebody else is going to need to fill that gap, or again, the line goes down until the global combat file, wherever it is, the next one, and that's where I see an opportunity for Pakistan potentially to step in, and as part of this agreement is work its way into the order book for the Brits and continue that production run. And obviously the big benefit here is now, even with, and this applies to the M346 as well, because we actually saw Leonardo demonstrating manned-unmanned teaming with the M346 and the Kızılelma. So with the Turks now having access to this could be quite an ideal platform for the three to build like a common like architecture around between the Kızılelma and other Turk Anka or whatever, to have this manned-unmanned teaming network. And it's the only aircraft that potentially all three could access. Yeah, and it would be a really, obviously the Typhoons would be an amazing Mirage replacement. They carry a ton more payload, ton more ordnance, more reliable, far more capable as well. The issue, I think one of the biggest problems with the Mirage is obviously you're limited in the kind of weapons you can carry. I don't think the Mirage carries any of the like the range extension kit, all the smarter weapons, right? The only sort of smart weapon they carry is the H4 and the H2, neither of which are great, obviously. So the problem with those is you need two aircraft for one bomb. One aircraft carries the data link pod, the other one carries the weapon and releases the weapon, and the other one guides it and carries the data link pod. So you've lost two aircraft there, but then you also need aircraft to provide air cover and all this, tankers and all this stuff. With the Typhoon, you don't need any of that, but that's also the kind of the problem, right? Is that everyone knows that this is a strike-oriented option focused on the Indians, and it gives Pakistan longer legs and more lethality when it comes to its strikes against India. In terms of acquiring the J-35, could Pakistan use it? I think that one I'll probably leave up to you.
Yeah, so in regards to Typhoon, I would say this is that the German opposition, if you notice, correlates with a certain period of time. Yeah. So through the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, the EU basically had American-led security guarantees, and they had very little incentive to invest in their own defense industry. So it was obvious to the German manufacturing base that the Typhoon was going to be important, right? So the idea that losing German jobs and this kind of thing, it was not a concern because number one, you always had German orders to back up the Typhoon, but then also, although it was a good thing to have, but exporting defense items to a country like Pakistan was not like the big priority. So as a result, what happened was that the defense vendors themselves, like Germany and France, especially in France, but also Germany, Britain, and what have you, they prioritized the Indian market because the Indian market would offer the carrot of like these massive mega deals, right? That would span decades and that would pretty much keep a company going pretty well for a long period of time, decades basically, until the next cycle. So that was the environment through the 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, right until the Ukraine war. Now, when the Ukraine war kicked in, that set off a couple of things, both as a result of the Ukraine war and also just coincidentally. So as a result of the Ukraine war, you now have the European Union having to invest very heavily in defense again. And obviously, they know themselves, because they've been running manufacturing for like hundreds of years at this point. They know that when you invest in these capacities, you would try your best to recoup those costs, right? And you're going to recoup them through exports. So in tandem with the manufacturing output growth or the investment in the industry itself and new products and what have you, they've also instituted a more liberal financing mechanism, right? Which is the SAFE initiative. And that allows basically countries like a Bangladesh and theoretically a Pakistan to start and in Indonesia to access more accessible financing to start procuring European weapons, right? And then that extends, even if the order is small, it extends the production outlook by just the next few years over and over and over again. And right now, obviously, the main users of SAFE are Poland and Ukraine, but the point is that once their procurement cycles are concluded, that money and a new wave of money will be injected, and once they pay back their loans, and there'll be more investment in it. I'm sure you have Saudi and Gulf sovereign wealth funds also putting money in there. So the point being is that there's going to be quite a bit of loans and mechanisms available to procure things. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The heyday of Pakistan's arms procurements from Europe coincided when such loans were readily available. So the Mirages, the brand new Mirages, the Daphne submarines, the Augusta 70s were bought in the 70s, right? Where basically the French had those loans on offer, even though the French themselves were involved in programs that were being sold to India. So, like the Jaguar, for example, or even before the 60s, in the 50s, you had the Mystère program. The French has sold, I think, over 100 Mystères to India. So the fact was that when the financing and the options to secure new customers through other mechanisms, other than upfront cash payments were available, the Europeans weren't as picky about losing a customer here or there because they knew that they could approach much of the world market, right? And that was that's why, for example, today you have like in Nigeria, right, being able to finance the Leonardo M-346FA. right? 24 of them, right? Because the financing and loans are now more readily available. They're much more liberally provided, basically. So whereas before they weren't, you have to pay up, you have to pay cash up front. So this is the environment we're entering in. And then you could factor in your Saudi Arabia, potentially Saudi finance through loans and credit and what have you. You have also the Turks weighing in as well. The Turks are also obviously going to look to integrate their own weapon systems and stuff into the Typhoon as well. So you have definitely, like, you don't have to rely on Europe for the cutting edge. Like the Turks, for example, have 2 different ramjet-powered air-to-air missile programs, right? Just to give you a sense of how much they're working on, in addition to cruise missiles and what have you. So yes, at one level, like with all these, and the coincidental aspect is that China's eating into the European manufacturing base by exporting things, and it's causing the German economy to lose jobs. So you compound these factors, there's less German resistance, I would imagine, towards allowing a Typhoon sale to Pakistan. Or where it gets tricky is where the Germans would want to manage their relationship with India, because they have a major submarine deal with India that they want to conclude and push. But again, in this sense, it's like either India is going to have to make all these different EU partners happy, which it might look to do, but again, that could create other downstream issues later on. So it's a bit of the way if you're a Pakistani decision maker, the way you kind of approach it, you kind of look for the options that are available. And you ask, like literally just ask. Like, don't assume that it's not there. Ask multiple times. Like you are a customer. Like never forget that, right? Even whether you're getting a loan or some credit system or whatever, whether you're paying over a longer period of time, you are the customer. No one's giving you a favor, right? That's the thing. This is the mentality we have to sort of develop, right? And then ultimately, yeah, if they all say no, we can then publicly say like, Bajwa, you all said no, so we had to go to China. Literally, you could do that, and that will like shake some feathers somewhere, because some shareholders will be like, well, why did we lose this market to China, right? Like, isn't it enough that we're losing jobs to China? We need to lose Pakistani procurements to China as well. So. And the fact is like, yeah, like in the past, France was selling things to India at the same time as selling it to Pakistan. In fact, the Germans were trying to market submarines to both India and Pakistan at the same time.
No, I mean,
this is well known.
Indians are buying the same submarine Pakistan almost bought.
Exactly, and Pakistan almost bought the same submarine India just bought in the 90s, because India bought the Type 209. The Type 209 was competing with the Augusta 90B.
But even now, the Type 214, for example, the Pakistan Navy. If it wasn't for financing issues, the Pakistan Navy would be operating it.
Exactly.
But there's always carrots to dangle as well on the stick, right? For example, Pakistan. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and just a point, that financing issue happened because the loans back then were not readily available. You had to get them from the German government. Now, the German government will just, or the TKMS or whoever, or like, let's say BAE Systems, or I would say like any potential Typhoon deal we negotiate with Leonardo. So Leonardo would just forward the request to the SAFE mechanism and then extract the loan, and that's it. From there, you move into the next steps. And now to be clear is that you also have to look at how the PAF approaches these things. The PAF, it was never a question of whether you can get a Typhoon. If the goal was to get 3 Typhoons, they could have done that, right? The issue is they would always pick a fighter that they can roadmap to a sufficient level of quantitative mass for the requirements. So the sufficient number has always been around 80 to 90. Minimum, right? So when you look at a high technology fighter, the PAF aims to fit the budget for around 80 to 90 units within a certain time period, usually around, to say, 10 to 15 years. And then for like a low-end fighter, like a lightweight fighter, they would try to find something that can fit into about 120 to 160. Those are the 2 ranges I've frequently come across in my readings. So when they selected the F-16, it was based on that number, right? Basically. So same with the J-10. When they selected the J-10, it was with the mindset of inducting eventually 90 plus fighters. And that's why they picked the J-10. Now, if the PAF, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, but if the PAF could rewind it, like let's say there was no conflict with India, let's say things just kind of straddled along, and now didn't induct J-10, we're in 2026, I would argue they would take the Typhoon way more seriously now, because the options are there. The options to finance them through bigger mechanisms are there, like SAFE, SAFE. The vendor willingness is supply side willingness is much higher, and as we noted, the numbers might be just in the PAF generally going down. So maybe now in the future they're not concerned about the 80 to 90 unit. They might rebudget to 60 units and then offload more tasks to drones and air defense systems, right? And in that, and then you have obviously the whole thing of interoperability with Saudi Arabia and Türkiye, which has downstream benefits. Like, yeah, you might be able to only budget for 60 new aircraft, but 10, 15 years from now, maybe the Saudis start offloading theirs.
Yeah, right? or obviously you've got access to anything the Turks develop. There's benefits there, but One of the
Yeah.
bigger angles that people tend to overlook is the Ukraine angle, especially with countries like Germany. It's a very big carrot that you can dangle in front of them that, look, hey, look, we've got the Pakistan Army intends to retire its T-80s, for example. The Ukrainians always need more equipment. And that's another angle you can look at. We can offload 400 tanks in exchange for massive discounts on, for example, Ukrainian equipment. Sorry, on, for example, Typhoons. These are, if we align ourselves with European foreign policy objectives, which also benefit us, like, for example, a relationship with Ukraine would be immensely beneficial for Pakistan. And learning from the experience in Ukraine, insanely beneficial for Pakistan. So if we align ourselves with European foreign policy objectives, which are indirectly also aligned with our objectives and goals and beneficial for us, there's a lot of Typhoon. This question would be a non-starter, right? Like, it's a given that we'd be able to access this kind of stuff, and we'd be able to access it at really amazing prices. Hell, we could even have the Europeans buy these tanks off us for a good amount of money as well. There's a lot to be explored here. It's really not as simple as people writing it off as easily as they do.
Exactly. And this is what, in the world of foreign policy, you notice there's a lot of gray in which we can operate through. And this is what other countries exploit, which we don't, because we don't let people who would ask those sort of questions come to the top and sort of take control of the policy, right? But the next question here was basically, would acquiring the J-35 lock the PF into the wider Chinese combat ecosystem? And the answer is frankly yes, because the thing is, you have to think the Chinese defense export model is very closely modeled off its consumer export model, right? You buy the package, right? If you want to like do the green revolution with China, you buy the solar panels, you buy the battery, you buy the software, you buy the car, you buy the phone, you buy it off of China. Because they have the economies of scale, and because it's single source, they can integrate so deeply, right? And it's a valid argument. Like, I don't want to crap on it. I'll be very frank. The Chinese have a point. I don't want you to break open a system that works, right? Like, we're not in Windows 95 world anymore. We're not in Windows XP world anymore, right? This is the Chinese argument. It's like, we have built and fine-tuned these things with AI and this and that to make sure it achieves the goal. And because of this tight integration, if you start opening and tinkering, you're going to create delays, you're going to add costs to the issue, you're going to create problems. You have to buy the package. Now, this is the thing, is that this is perfectly fine in the consumer world. This is not good in the defense world, right? In the defense world, you prioritize sovereign control. And this is how the PAF and the Pakistan Navy both operated. This is how they built their entire architecture to this point, that they would work with Türkiye or Sweden or whatever, Germany, to build their own data links. They would then bring in their own companies like NESCOM and NRTC to then do the software development work. Then they would know how the system works. They'll be able to then build the resiliencies and jam resistant properties and the security measures into it, right? And then they're able to extend it to different platforms of their choice. Now, what's happened is that because of the very valid and concerning supply side restrictions that we faced through the 2010s, we saw the Pakistan Army pivot more sharply into the Chinese out-of-the-box model. Get the VT-4s. The VT-4s work with the SH-15s. The SH-15s work with the Z-10s. The Z-10s work with these drones and munitions. It just works. And increasingly, the PAF is looking at this probably. And unfortunately, from my perspective, they're leaning more into it. And I don't agree with this approach because I think, again, defense needs to be sovereign controlled. And yes, that'll result in some messiness, in some delays, in some stuff like that. But you emerge from that with a skilled labor pool who know how to build these systems and manage them. This is how the PAF was when it was integrating Sidewinders into the F6, right? This is how the PAF was when it was working with South Africa to integrate standoff weapons to the Mirages, right? This is how NESCOM wants to be, right, in trying to integrate like its munitions into the J-17. And the problem is that if we start locking and buying these out-of-the-box systems, we're going to be cutting opportunities for our own industry to operate in. And our own industry is going to start to adapt to this new reality, and they're going to potentially lose a lot of skills and capabilities and infrastructure because those things are not getting demand in the long run. Like right now, you have NESCOM trying to design and build new generation cruise missiles like the Rasool series for the Pakistan Navy, evidently for the Pakistan Navy. It's unfortunate. And if you look at the Rasool, it's very similar in concept to the Naval Strike Missile from Norway. But it's very unfortunate that we cannot apply the same munition in all likelihood to the J-35s because we're going to be opening it up and this and that, and China won't allow it, right? Whereas the Turkish approach, the Khan, it's an open-ended architecture. They're willing to invite partners, and if partners co-invest and join the development program, you would have access to that. And I think there was a bit of a shift. In my perspective, I think at the time of Air Chief Marshal Mujahid Anwar Khan, it was more of a traditional approach of maintaining sovereign control over our own technology stacks and customizing and stuff, and it seemed like he was going in that direction. And then more recently, it seems they've pivoted, and there's a camp. There are two camps in the PAF. One wants to maintain the traditional approach, and the other wants to just make sure it works and get it out of the box, right? And they're both valid arguments in different respects. But I think when you're a country that's trying to really establish itself and maintain and build a defense industry, you would want to weigh in on the sovereign control part. All right. Next question from Mohammed. So how did the PAF strategic environment, sanctions, finances, threat perceptions, and operational requirements shape its force development decisions from the mid-1990s to today? Which fighter aircraft, support systems, and weapons and modernization options did the PF evaluate during this period? And why were some selected, such as the J-17, F-16 upgrades, and J-10 and ERI, while others were rejected, delayed, or became unavailable? What distinct phases can be identified in the PF's evolution since 1995, and how did each phase lead to the force structure, supply relations, and capability priorities of the PF today? So I would say this, like the way I approach it is that if you follow the PF's history as early as possible, you'll notice that they go through, starting from the 70s, they would typically go through these procurement cycles. So there'd be one decade of these like massive inductions, like in the 80s you had the F-16s, and in a subsequent decade you would have basically like force consolidation and expansion of the previous induction or the inductions from the previous decade. So you started with inducting the F-16s in the 80s, and the goal of the 90s was to basically build that fleet up. Obviously, it didn't happen because of Pressler, but that was a general approach. So let's say the Americans never agreed to sell us the F-16s. Let's say the Americans just said no to the F-16s at any point. Then the PAF would have gone for the Mirage 2000, right? So let's say they would start off with like 20 Mirage 2000s or 40 Mirage 2000s in the 1980s, and then to the 1990s would expand that fleet to like 90 units or something. That would have been the approach. So similarly, they inked the deal for the J-10 in 2019 or 2018, 2019, and then it got inducted early in the early 2020s, but my hunch is that they were intending to make the 2020s a decade where they would just keep expanding the J-10 fleet, which we haven't seen yet. Right? We could be wrong, and we know that PF, Air Vice Marshal Tariq Ghazi, he basically said that should be the goal, but they would use the subsequent decade for that. And then once that decade concludes, they would enter into the next big procurement cycle. So in terms of the today and now, the next big procurement cycle is from 2030 onwards. Why? Because they need a platform to start replacing the F-16 Block 15s, basically. And that's going to be the big procurement cycle. Like that is like huge, right? That is the one that is like the big hitter. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, we're arguing that it's just sort of being consigned off to China without any real sense of competition, industry involvement, none of the stuff you see in India to really drum it up and get people excited, involved, bring in the wider industry to offer solutions, drive conversations for offsets and technology partnerships and that kind of stuff. None of that. It's just like, what? Yeah, we have F-16s to replace, and then maybe we're just going to consign it off, right? And that is the unfortunate side of it. Hopefully not. Hopefully there's a chance that maybe if we had ideas 2026, which we canceled, and I don't recall any news of updates of it returning, we would have had the opportunity for the industry to sort of come up and offer something. But again, that wasn't there. But this is how it would approach. So you have the 2030s, which would be the next big procurement cycle, and then 2040s would be the consolidation cycle. And that's what the PF's budgetary approach generally allows. Now, within the details, it's like the way, as I said earlier, the way they would use to budget for the way they would select an aircraft from a fiscal standpoint was based on whether they can induct 80 to 90 units. So if the goal was just to induct 24 units, then yeah, they could have gone for like the Typhoon in like 2015. They could have gone for like the SU-35 even. Like, if that was the goal, was just the 24 units, right? Then you can budget, you can have a higher per unit overhead. But they were looking for the ability to scale out so they can have the capability spread. So they have enough units to sort of cover all their areas of responsibilities, basically, or areas of interest. So that's how they would budget it. So obviously now when you're transitioning over to bigger fighters in the next generation, J-35, the Khan, they're basically medium to medium heavyweight fighters. And the Khan especially is, I think, is like an F-15 class fighter in terms of its pure size. You might then budget a lower unit overhead. So basically, instead of 80 and 90 units, you might look at 60 units. And then you go from there. And then that's how your decision. And then obviously you have other platforms you can sort of lean into. You have now the very mature JF-17, right? You know how to operate it. You have all the infrastructure for it. Ideally, you would keep rolling out new JF-17s with new technologies within them, like a gallium nitride radar and a new integrated gallium nitride-based electronic countermeasure system, and so on, so that it could interoperate with the more advanced fighters. And then you also introduce drones into the picture as well. And more surface-to-air missile systems. So that is the general approach. Now, when it comes to specific cases, I mean, there's just many different factors that feed into it. Like, for example, in the 90s, the PAF did try to pivot from the F-16 to the Mirage 2000 and then to the Mirage 2000-5. The problem was, and this goes back to the much earlier point, was that it required a loan, right? It required credit. It required financing. And at this point, because the defense industry in France and the EU was not the number one priority, right, because of the peace dividend, because of NATO and all that, the financing mechanisms from the private market, from the banks and all that was dried up. So you have to rely on the French government directly issuing a loan, right? And I remember reading through the materials at the time was that the French Ministry of Finance, despite the French government really trying to push the Mirages to Pakistan and really trying to get the deal going, the French Ministry of Finance was basically blocking it at every turn. So now you have one source of financing help, and they're basically saying no, 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 right? What's interesting was that in the late 70s, when the PAF was first sort of looking for their next fighter plane, the Americans were only comfortable offering the F5 and A7, and later they revised it to the F-16, 7-9, and the F-20. But one thing that the Carter administration also offered, if you look through WikiLeaks, was that he basically said that to the PAF that, hey, if you want like the Mirages or other platform from Europe, the Americans would sort of get the financing package together for that to secure the loan for you for that program. So you can tell there's a big difference how it was in the 70s and 80s compared to the 90s and 2000s in terms of accessing these financing mechanisms. And my argument is that because those financing mechanisms are sort of opening up again, there are more options this time around than there were back 10, 15, 20 years ago. That's in the case of the Mirage story. Then you have with the Gripen, the situation with the Gripen was that from my understanding was that yes, Saab did market the fighter to the PF, but I feel that it was likely given a lot of push by the British. Like the British were really trying to get exports for this fighter going, and the British at that time had a better relationship with Pakistan compared to more recent years. But basically, they likely facilitated the testing and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, it had the American engine, the GE F404, which again made it a non-starter for the PAF, essentially, unfortunately, in that sense. And then you had with the Russians, there's a weird back and forth situation in the 90s where the Russians went through this like complete shift in everything. They went from like being the communist Soviet state with very ideological perspectives on everything to like complete as free as you could be market economy where everything was for sale, essentially, in a sense. And there was this option where the Pakistan government, the Russian government were discussing the possibility of buying MiG-29s or Su-27s. Unfortunately, number one, from the PF standpoint, those aircraft and their configurations at that time were not up to par. And the second issue, and the proof of this is like it's not a PF thing. I mean, you can look at how much difficulty the Poles and the unified Germans had in integrating these platforms and upgrading them and stuff. And you can also look into the Indian Su-30 MKI program as an example of how much customization work the Indians had to do and how long that took to really get going. So definitely in that sense, the PF had a valid perspective. Unfortunately, also because the Indians committed to the Su-30, the Russian option fell through. And then you had the Tornado option. The Tornado was like a really good either long-range interceptor / strike fighter, depending on which configuration you got. So the Tornado would have been a great option if we had F-16s. Like if we had the 100 F-16s for a multi-role, we could have replaced the Mirages with the Tornado in the strike role, right? Or similarly, we could have replaced the Mirage with the JH-7, which was also an offer from China. But again, very similar to the Tornado. It wasn't the multi-role platform that PF was looking at. So there are all these like very specific kind of problems and issues. And then you had these other like JF-17 style programs that just got like destroyed for one reason or the other. So I remember Yugoslavia had the Novi Avion.
Yeah.
So there's some like really, I heard from some retired PF people, some like really insane stories about the PF pursuing that somehow. But then the Yugoslav war happened. It got destroyed, the entire program. Then you had the General Carver, same thing. It was like this like Gradier Gripen type fighter got killed because of South Africa lost all the incentives. Lovey was not going to be an option. That was a non-start.
I mean,
J10 people.
Yeah. Hey, it's funny how much like Jewish influence there is in Pakistan. Sea Sultan, J10. Well,
yeah, those J10s are actually Loveys. We just kind of disguise them. No.
Bro, the VP of Paramount is an ex-IDF officer.
Yeah, and he has like a relationship with the Pakistan military.
Yeah, they're doing the conversion for the Sea Sultans.
Yeah, he was. I believe I have a very strong hunch he was on the old Pakistan Defense Forum. Remember that guy named Deno?
Yeah.
He said he was a Jewish South African guy, and he was like so pro Pakistan. It was like wow. So like there's some interesting stories out there as well. But anyways, so all these like individual programs, they weren't viable for one reason or the other. It really boiled down to later the Typhoon Rafale story. And that's an interesting story as well. So what happened in 2005, after the PAF selected the F-16, they had another program called Plus One. And basically at this time, the air headquarters, they were basically like looking at the J-10, the Rafale, and the Typhoon Tranche 1.
Yeah.
And interestingly, at that time, the company that Leonardo eventually became, or the company that was Leonardo's old name, Alenia Aeronautici, I think, they were hoping to, they're basically literally their CEO or some of their executives were like on Flight Global or Flight International were quoted saying that they wanted to sell the Typhoon to Türkiye and have Türkiye then re-export made in Turkey models to Pakistan. So that was a thing that was on the card, but the Turks went for the F-35. And obviously the Typhoon was like just at that time, the Tranche 1 was just purely air-to-air fighter, which the PF F-16s were already covering. And then the Rafale has a very like morbid story to it. So I know there's like a perception from people that the PF rejected it, which is not the case.
Yeah.
So there's an interview with Air Vice Marshal Arshad Malik, and this is where India's MOD shenanigans came in. So basically, initially when the PAF started talking to Dassault about the Rafale, Dassault actually sent out a unit for testing in Pakistan, which is like a big deal. It was a great fighter, multi-role, everything you'd ask for it. And then when the time came when the PF requested it, requested more serious talks, the Dassault said no. And this is from Air Vice Marshal Arshad Malik, basically. He literally said that we asked to see the Rafale again, and they said no. And that was because India's either was a single M or the double M, one of the two MMRC programs. The same program that's running today. Like, imagine. It's the same one. The 126 yeah, they dangled 126 Rafales on everybody.
Yeah.
And 126 Gripens and 126 Typhoons and 126. So that whole episode happened. So, but the thing was, like, at that time, the industry was going to cut us off because, again, there was no financing mechanisms, and everybody would just wanted cash. So India had total domain authority there, right? But now in this new environment, it's not as clear cut for India, right? So that the point being is that you have more leeway and flexibility. Arslan, anything to add here?
I think that covers it quite well.
Yeah. So there was one more point. Oh yeah, and then the PF also had evaluated the Su-35 in 2015, and the MiG-35 or the MiG-29 M2 because the MiG-35 wasn't real. And literally the only thing I heard in relation to those evaluations was that the PF at that time, number one, because the Su-35 was like way too tightly integrated with what Russia had. So this goes back to the whole out of the box thing. So the Russians told the PF that, hey, look, this is going to work a certain way out of the box. So you have to buy all the munitions and everything from us. And the PF there was no scope for any additional modifications to it. So that was the problem with the Su-35. And the problem with the MiG-35 was that it was basically vaporware. Although it was like a cool concept. Imagine like a twin engine J-17, right? You could have so much commonality between the two, but between the engines and the radar and avionics, and it was like an open-ended platform. So the idea of the MiG-35 is that you can configure the radar, weapon systems, anything you want. But unfortunately, it was vaporware at the time. So that could not go. And then there was this weird thing I heard from a very trusted source. Basically, the PF couldn't go ahead with either, also for the reason that the infrastructure and it didn't have the infrastructure for it. So the hardened air shelters would have to be expanded. They're too small. They need to replace them. Hangar facilities. Like, there's a whole like backdrop that they had to catch up with, and that was also a contributing factor as well.
Also, I assume they just weren't up to scratch with what the PAF wanted, right? The state of the Russian electronics industry is still stuck in the Soviet times. They're still struggling. Yeah. Hell, the PAF inducted the AESAs airborne before the Russians were able to. So
exactly. Yeah, like the Su-35 had a passive electronically scanned array radar.
Yeah, missiles.
But it was super tightly integrated with, you had to get the Russian stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. And then with the MiG-35, it was the exact opposite. It was like the open-ended fighter, but it just didn't exist.
It's one of those ones, right? It was really, and it just comes back to the point I made earlier about the British, right? Was the Russian MiG was basically surviving off of like MiG-29 sustainment and MiG-21 sustainment programs. They weren't selling new fighters. Even the Russians weren't buying new MiGs either. So it's kind of like they really needed something to just keep going. Otherwise, they were going to go bust. And then I think they ended up getting bought out by the UAC and Sukhoi and what that.
Exactly.
But you can really play that industrial angle and pitch the industrial benefits to these countries of your order. Exactly what I was saying about the British.
Exactly. And yeah, now we circle back again. And I think our argument has been that, look, like, despite if we just remove shenanigans, if we just look at it from a pure traditional PAF approach, when it comes to replacing the F-16ABs, the Typhoon would, in the traditional PAF approach, definitely have a shot. Definitely. Even now, it would have a shot. But the issue is that then like those old assumptions no longer work today in the PAF. I'll just leave it there, basically. Because we still want to get like that on-site visit.
Yeah. Still fun.
And we will happily like support any procurement the PAF undertakes if we get said visit and funding. We are sellouts, people. We're pragmatic sellouts. We're very honest. We are total sellouts.
Yeah, just nobody's bought us out yet. Yeah, we need a salesman. We're gonna we need a sales. We need somebody to make the pitches. Somebody buy us out, please. We'll parrot any propaganda you want.
Yeah, like what is this? Pakistani leaders going to the White House and we don't get invited. Like, come on, like we buy us out. We're
Natalie.
Oh, that would be so funny if we get bought out. But it was like, because we would just, we would play up to it shamelessly. I'll be very honest.
Oh, absolutely. Just pay us.
We have kids to feed here.
We'll do whatever you want. Just pay us enough.
But but in seriousness, like the point being is that the assumptions, they don't rest right now. But I would say that it could go either way. I mean, at the end of the day, look, air headquarters is full of human beings, right? So if someone comes in with like a really well articulated deal package, I think they can at least get an evaluation going. Yeah. And then from there, it depends, right? No one saw the Pakistan Navy procuring the MBDA CAMM-ER. So this, like, even if you argue, well, like they did buy the Turkish corvettes and sign on to the Jinnah, you could have argued they could have bought Turkish SAMs.
Yeah, Turkish SAMs or the Honto as well from South Africa. Nobody, or even like. Yeah, the CAM was a very dark horse. Like HQ-16 was the initial plan as well, right? That was that wasn't selected because they wanted it. They selected it because they had no other choice. But then they ended up being able to access CAMM-ER. Yeah, I remember in those years, the head of Italy's like defense industry, like their equivalent, he used to make a lot of high-profile visits to Pakistan. Like there's like a succession of 2 or 3 of them in a row, and they're like a visit to the Pakistan Navy. And I kind of just guessed out that either it's for helicopters or it's for like SAMs. Yeah. And I was expecting helicopters, surprisingly enough, but it turned out to be SAMs. Now we see Naveed in the UK and a lot of engagement in the UK. And who else is in the UK that the PN could have a relationship with? Augusta Westland in Yeovil.
Yeah, and not just that, like the whole Lloyd thing that happened recently. I mean, look, like this stuff doesn't happen out of like kindness, right? There's something that the British government is hoping to get out of the PN. And I know the British government traditionally has been looking to sell warships to the PN. The Babcock Arrow concept, I can tell you for sure, it had landed on the PN's desk at several points. And if not surface ships, they're looking for something. Like it's either helicopters, it could be other things. Like there's a back and forth here. This is very clear. There's definitely a back and forth. The Pakistan Navy has leverage, and credit to the naval staff. I mean, the naval NHQ, they play it well. Like they do the good stuff. Like they do things correctly. I mean, most cases.
Yeah, if that was a model to be replicated, it would be like 90% of what the Navy does.
Yeah, like the Navy operates really well and having the fewest resources as well.
Yeah,
good.
It's really impressive.
Next question from Rohan: how extensively is the Pakistan Army currently using quadcopters in counterterrorism operations for reconnaissance, surveillance, and target identification, and directing troops during raids and small unit engagements? Is the growing use of quadcopters materially reducing casualties by helping units detect IEDs, ambushes, and concealed fighters, and dangerous approaches before exposing soldiers, or are their effects still too limited or uneven to change casualty trends significantly? Should the Army develop a more systematic FPV drone capability for kinetic missions integrated with the infantry, special operations forces, and quick reaction units to engage threats before troops enter compounds, caves, or higher risk operations? What do you think, Arslan?
To touch on the first bit, and then I'll hand the rest over to you, is I mean, we've seen some pretty widespread counterinsurgency deployments. And actually, when we had the skirmish with Afghanistan, we saw a ton of FPV use, and we do see some use, a lot of it with like the FC and the police. But at the end of the day, like when it comes to stuff like this, casualties, and we'll never know because the numbers we get are just not accurate, right? We'll never be able to create an accurate picture of this, but we do see widespread use of these, and I think it's a very good step in reducing casualties, especially when you're in these like really tight areas and you're fighting in between buildings and small compounds. Having these FPVs to be able to suss out where these targets are and where these attacks are is very handy, and I really think these are something that should be deployed. Sorry, just drones in general, just be deployed with these units in like Balochistan, for example, so they can see where they're being fired upon, so they can actually respond to it with these ambushes, and also clearing vehicle routes to prevent ambushes. But stuff like detecting IEDs and it's quite hard with these. They're usually dug under and remotely detonated or detonated with pressure pads. So they're quite hard to spot. So I don't necessarily think this is with that, but the widespread use of drones, quadcopters in counterinsurgency operations, it will have had to have played a positive impact in their ops, especially with casualty reduction, because it just gives them another perspective to be able to accurately target and keep their troops safe.
Exactly. And they've been deployed. I would say this is that it's more middle out, meaning that you do have, it's being driven at the operational layer. And it's like very similar to the Ukrainian model, interestingly enough, where the operational, like field level personnel are engaging directly with the private sector and state-owned industries. And you have, I don't want to reveal too much, but basically you have like that essentially bottom-up approach. It hasn't been a top-down systemized approach just yet. It's in the works. I mean, I know there's a training school that's been established a few months ago, maybe even up to a year ago, but it hasn't reached to the point where you have like embedded, let's say, FPV units within every single unit, or you have like some sort of, the way Ukraine has like both at a technology level and also at a doctrinal level, where they have like both an organization that manages FPVs and interceptors, and at the same time there's like a technology system, like a battlefield management system that ingests data and sort of helps coordinate these operations, and has like cascading layers where, for example, you identify an incoming insurgency or an incursion, and then you have like a step-by-step SOP on how to engage it, starting with your FPVs or starting with your long-range drones, then to your guided artillery and so on. The point is that the Pakistan Army, to its credit, has infused a lot of technology very rapidly in the last few years, like from guided shells to obviously like guided artillery rockets, the Fatah 1 and so on, obviously through even like, they're even trying to, they even have like more MRAPs coming in through the First Wind program. So there's a lot of stuff happening, but the issue is that you have to consider like the insurgency stuff has flared up pretty quick, pretty rapidly, quite recently. So there's a bit of middle out catch up. So it's very similar to how it was in the early days in like the previous insurgency cycle in like the late 2000s, where initially like you would have ad hoc PAF units go and help ad hoc army units, right? Before it became systemized. I think eventually it'll get there, but it's just not, from my understanding, there yet. But there is, wherever used to have right now, it is having a positive impact for sure. It's just that it's not like a top down thing yet, basically.
Yeah.
Next question is from Farhan. How significant is India's move towards a continuous at-sea nuclear deterrence for Pakistan, particularly in terms of shorter reaction times, permanently mated warheads, and crisis stability? How is Pakistan's strategic community likely to respond doctrinally through changes in nuclear posture, command and control arrangements, alert levels, or the role assigned to the Pakistan Navy? Could Pakistan pursue a more survivable sea-based deterrent through conventionally powered nuclear submarines equipped with advanced AIP and nuclear-capable missiles, or would it require a fundamentally different platform and broader force structure? So I'll just start with number 3, and we'll go backwards with Arslan as well. If you asked us 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whether the Pakistan Navy would use conventionally powered subs with nuclear-tipped missiles, we might have said yes, maybe not. I would say this time around, definitely no, because there's just so much more at stake on the conventional end that the Pakistan Navy wants to finalize first before it even broaches that possibility. And ideally, it doesn't want to broach that possibility, because if you look at the way we approached our nuclear program, which is interesting, is that our nuclear reactors, the civilian ones, are under safeguards. And we even place voluntary safeguards on them, because we're trying to make it very clear that anything related to the military is anything involving militarized nuclear use is on a very hard firewall, and it's kept completely separate from the civilian side, like entirely. So for example, even the CAMM-ER reactor, which PAEC sort of had to quasi reverse engineer in order to maintain it, that's also under voluntary safeguards. So we don't even use the plutonium from there, which could have helped boost our warheads output. We will, by doctrine and law, we will not use that reactor. Same with Chashma, right? Any military use of nuclear will have to come from non-safeguarded processes from start to finish. So it's a very similar approach here. But I think that same mentality is within the Navy, is that any true sea-based deterrence capability will come through a dedicated nuclear-powered submarine, which will be pursued, designed, built, whatever, through a separate, completely independent capability relative to the actual, to the conventional stuff. So, and the reason for that is that, number one, the submarine technology in general is so proprietary and sensitive by its nature. And I feel that not that I feel, I'm pretty sure that the Pakistan Navy is making good inroads, right, with the West, even in getting more and more access to that on the grounds of establishing that anti-access and area denial posture. Them saying, look, we want to build an original submarine, which interestingly the naval chief confirmed. And the goal for this original submarine is to basically defend our waters. We have no other objective from this specific program. So until that gets sorted and dealt with, they are not going to muddy the waters with nuclear on that front. And actually, they'll never do it. Instead, what will happen is that while this is going on, the Pakistan Navy's goal would be in parallel, in all likelihood. And I mean, they've hinted towards this rather, but then they won't comment any further for understandable reasons. But the idea is that in parallel to this, they will, through a separate secretive program, continue on trying to build their own nuclear-powered submarine to eventually handle the deterrence role. And the advantage of that is you have now a very long endurance, high-speed asset that can operate pretty much from anywhere in the entire Arabian Sea or Indian Ocean to make sure that you always have that capability somewhere, right? And then in tandem, you'll have your conventional submarines essentially be used to help potentially guard your own waters from any Indian naval activity. And then you might also look to have a nuclear-powered submarine to essentially go and chase down Indian nuclear-powered submarines, basically. And that is the essential approach. Now, how they get there is going to be, they're not going to tell us, right? But who knows? I mean, it's always worth noting that there's countries like Türkiye that want to develop a nuclear submarine. There's potentially there might be some erosion of those American-led safeguards if the Saudi nuclear deal goes through, which then might have downstream effects globally. So many different scenarios, but it's hard to know. But I would say that at least on this front, they're not going to muddy the waters between conventional and nuclear. Either they'll have a nuclear or they'll have no nuclear, is my perspective. Right? So the next part was basically how is Pakistan's strategic community like to respond doctrinally. So the issue is that India's nuclear subs are like the tip of the iceberg here. The bigger problem that Pakistan is trying to articulate, and might not be doing it very effectively, because the way it sort of articulates it as like a bit of a complainer, not an actual like threat assessor. But basically, like what Pakistan wants to drive focus towards is the fact that India is on the verge of a nuclear breakout. So because of the bilateral dealings that the U.S. and India have, because of the bilateral like uranium access India has, and the perception that Pakistan carries of India is that basically by basically allowing India to access civilian nuclear technology, all of India's indigenous uranium is now fully available for its weapons program. So as a result, it's on the verge of a breakout. And if you compound that with the fact that it has these IRBMs and ICBMs and what have you, and now these nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, it obviously Pakistan, like you can only like hammer Pakistan so many times before it should become apparent to the rest of the world that this is not just a Pakistan problem, right? It's not just a China problem. That this potentially down the line could be leveraged against the Middle East. It could be potentially leveraged against Turkey. It could be potentially leveraged against other powers and other countries. And that is something Pakistan has not been able to articulate really well, because the way Pakistan approaches it is that this is how Pakistan's strategic community sort of talks about it, or intelligentsia. This is how they frame it. India is getting these nuclear powered submarines. This is going to disrupt the regional balance. This is destabilizing. Oh no, someone help. Like, this is not the approach. The correct approach would actually not even talk about this in public, frankly, because you sound like a complainer. You sound like a whiner. Rather, India's doing what it's doing. You go and speak to countries bilaterally. Now, in terms of on the tactical outcome, in terms of India's continuous nuclear at sea capability, I mean, at the end of the day, look, it's not just for Pakistan. Yes, it plays a role, and it allows India to ensure that no matter what scenario it falls, that you'll always have an at sea nuclear capability that can hit Pakistan. Sure, but at some point, a certain point, like you factor in the range of the missiles, the nature of the SSBNs, their size and their range, their endurance. It's not just a Pakistan issue. Like, India, frankly, does not even need the sea-based deterrence capability to deal with Pakistan. I'll be frank. If you were to compare Pakistan, I mean, if you compare the scope of India's nuclear weapons program, its delivery programs, its land and air-based launch capabilities, the sea is not a factor for Pakistan right now, or ever will be, right? It's not a Pakistan thing. The fact is we have to have a proper reading of the Indian elite. The Indian elite see India as a global power. They have their own ambitions. And we have to, and I know in Pakistan we sort of deride this, but if we don't recognize this, then we're not going to ever operate at their we're not even going to operate at the trajectory of their level. Forget their level. And that's my perspective on the whole nuclear thing. What do you think, Arslan?
Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. Next one from Muhammad S. Okay, that way. Why might the Saab Gripen be a more natural replacement for the PAF's F-16s than the larger and more expensive Typhoon, particularly in terms of operating costs, infrastructure, and force size and mission profile? What political, export control, supply chain, weapons integration, and technology access barriers would Pakistan face in acquiring and sustaining the Gripen? When comparing the Gripen and Typhoon, which aircraft would better meet the PAF's long-term requirements for replacing older F-16s while preserving fleet affordability, operational independence, and compatibility with Pakistani weapons and networks?
Right.
What do you think, Arslan?
The best replacement for the PAF's F-16s is the F-16. The PAF operates an older variant of the F-16. The ones that are nearing retirement are the original Block 15s and those older airframes. The best replacement is just new F-16s. There's no need for us to jump ship to another platform. The F-16s are still in production and they still have a lifespan of 40, 50 years. They still operate one of the most capable radars to grace our skies. The F-16 is going nowhere for the next 60, 50, 60 years, right? So, and the PF has a ton of experience with it, a ton of tactics development. The pilots love it. The pilots know it. It's the perfect plane. There's no need to look elsewhere for the F-16 replacement, right? When we talk about the Typhoon, we're talking about independent of the F-16 because at least my personal belief is that the PF will need to induct something larger unless a twin fifth gen option is available, a twin seat, a fifth gen option is available. If not, I think the PF will need to induct something larger because I don't think the JF-17B would be optimal. Yeah, it doesn't have the kind of loiter time needed for month missions where you're up there, two crew, tasking a bunch of drones deep into Indian territory and controlling. Yeah, I don't think the JF-17 has the legs for that. I think something like the Typhoon, which will natively get that integration via Turkey anyway. Islam, they're building their future force structure on it. So I think it'll natively come with that integration of Kizlelma and all these other manned-unmanned teaming systems. I think that's what the angle we look at the Typhoon from, this collaboration out with the Saudis, the Turks, but also giving the Pakistan Air Force the legs to strike deep and the shoulders to carry tons of payload, which the PF just doesn't have at the moment. The Gripen is a non-starter. I don't think the Gripen in any case will ever be available to the PF again. Saab is very interested in wooing over India and trying to get the Gripen into India and help. They're actually still trying to get the Gripen into India. And the Indians are evaluating. So I just don't think the Gripen is a possibility even. But I just don't understand. I don't see the point in the Gripen anyway. It's more expensive to procure than the F-16. It's more expensive to run per hour than the F-16. It has too many stakeholders. You've got ITAR, you've got the Brits. The Brits produce 30% of the Gripen. So you've got too many stakeholders. The Swedes, they're too sanction friendly. They're very human rights and tree hugging hippies. They're quite sanction happy. There is no merit to the Gripen, basically.
I agree. At the end of the day, the most natural replacement for the F-16 would be more F-16s. Ideally, a mix of both brand new Block 72s, and then if you can grab any used Pratt & Whitney CDs out there and get them through a service life extension program, if you can bring up at least 5 squadrons in total, including the ones that we have right now, that would just be a perfectly fine development size. And from there, you can parallel off additional J-10s or build the J-17 fleet. I think that's pretty much what the ideal scenario for the PF would be. So then they can then channel the resources towards the Khan or something later on in the once it's mature, or J-35 from like the late 2030s or 2040s. So that's on that. Next one is from Tayyib. So it's again very similar to the preceding nuclear deterrence question. So same answer for that. But that being said, there's one point here, is just one little sentence I want to actually address, which is the long-term security of uranium and nuclear fuel supplies. So this is actually one of the constraining factors to Pakistan's nuclear program. Basically, long story short, it might be a bit of a tainted abbreviation of mine, but basically the long story short is that in the 2000s or so, General President Pervez Musharraf essentially came to a understanding with America where the US would lift sanctions essentially on Pakistan and sort of let it maintain its nuclear weapons program under the condition of very strict segregation between the civilian and military side, and also on the condition that Pakistan would basically work through the nuclear suppliers group. And Pakistan's entry to the nuclear suppliers group is conditional on India entering the nuclear suppliers group, which Turkey and China don't want to allow. Now, Turkey is more like out of principle for Pakistan. Like if Pakistan can come in, then India can come in. That's on that front. But the other side is that China, obviously China does not want India in the nuclear suppliers group, which has this weird, unfortunate downstream effect of Pakistan not having access to the nuclear suppliers group. And now the result of that is that if we can't have access to the NSG, then entirely depends on bilateral agreements. And obviously, we are not getting those bilateral agreements, unlike India. India has a bilateral agreement with the US and has potential fuel agreements coming up with Australia or Canada, basically. Ideally, Pakistan would somehow, some way, some form construct a bilateral uranium agreement with a country like Kazakhstan, for example, right? But we've had difficulty on that front for different reasons. So at least the Russians have a say in that matter, obviously, and then obviously even China has interest as well. So it's not a easy question. I mean, the ideal would be this, and it goes back to the opening topic, right? The Mecca Joint Defence Agreement. The ideal would be that you would have a country like Türkiye, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so on, basically try to build a parallel uranium market, right? Like Pakistan has the expertise to develop the entire nuclear fuel cycle indigenously. What PAC needs is funding, right? To be able to do this at scale. Funding that Pakistan itself does not have. Turkey and Saudi Arabia do have that funding, right? And yes, if you go and build a parallel nuclear architecture, yeah, you're going to hit sanctions with the West, especially America, sure. But that is the point of independence, right? That you make the investment so you can control the end-to-end stack yourself and then build from there. So now you could have potentially a scenario where, yes, it could take longer, it's more difficult, sure. But I mean, the thing is, the nuclear expertise is already there. PAC has it. They have the expertise, they have the sciences, they have the know-how, right? They know how to build the entire fuel cycle from the point of uranium extraction all the way to the reactor indigenously. Right? The issue is not the lack of know-how. It's the lack of just the sense of nation building everywhere. It's like just invest in PAC, fund them. They will help build the entire fuel cycle in Turkey and Saudi. It doesn't matter. And then in return, Turkey and Saudi can, in addition to the funding, build the alternative uranium market. And basically these countries and anyone in their orbits or whatever, like Azerbaijan or Qatar or even the UAE, Kuwait, whoever, can be part of a collective nuclear umbrella, so to speak, from an energy and potentially, speaking to the India point, from a military standpoint. And you can decide what's safeguarded and not safeguarded. It's up to you. You can make those decisions. Like these countries, these regions, this central region of the world sits on 2 or 3 of the most crucial trade transit routes, sits on immense oil and gas wealth, right? Has both a mix of population density and population scarcity in some areas, let's say has a sparse population spread in the Gulf. You have innate advantages in the way, in terms of like being able to subsidize energy and what have you. Like for example, if these central regions were able to have their own independent nuclear energy architecture, they can power their desalination plants so easily and urbanize even further. They can reroute their oil and gas towards industrial output, right? Subsidize their steel or alloys or whatever. You can counterbalance the East and West, right, as a block in that broad sense. But the problem is that, unfortunately, forget the lack of shared enemies or whatnot. We don't even have we even lack a sense of shared desire for co-prosperity. And that's one of the defining features. Like Europe has an issue where you could argue Poland and Germany before the Russia-Ukraine war didn't see Russia the same way. Germany saw Russia as an economic partner and Poland didn't. So that didn't stop these countries from cooperating together and co-investing and building their industries and stuff together, right? And the Germans and Poles are very different people. I know people like to say, "Oh, these are Europeans are homogenous." No, they're different as well. Right? They have their differences, including some pretty checkered history for World War II. So the point being is that these countries can get across it. Unfortunately, I would argue it's not. I think we just lack the nation building mentality, and until we have it, we're gonna constantly be running circles, basically, unfortunately. And speaking of circles, thanks, Arslan, for joining me for another circular episode. So we started the episode on a bleak moment, we ended on a bleak moment. So anyways,
as with every episode.
Pretty much, this is the bleak episode, the bleak podcast. Like all Pakistanis, we're going in that direction. But nonetheless,
some good news.
We need good news for sure.
Die.
Yeah.
Right?
Like actual good news, not like the other good news. Like we don't want like random
J30
random
August 4th.
Not that good news.
I'm not that good news.
We want
we could see a J35 induction in 2 days, guys. Who knows? There's some people who've been predicting on August 14th. We'll see them. We'll find out in 2 days.
Honestly, not to sound facetious, I can see a scenario where the PF inducts the J35, but it would be like one of those how the Turks technically inducted the F-35 in the US.
Yeah.
And it was it could be that, like a ceremonial handover. That could completely be a thing. I wouldn't surprise me if that's what happens. And that's where we're going to leave it, folks. Once again, thank you for listening. And if you made it to this point, wow, thank you. We really appreciate it. We will try to segment the questions into separate little smaller videos, but we're going to keep the big 2-hour clunker as well, primarily because this is easier to upload sooner. And then also we get a lot of feedback from folks saying that, hey, why are your podcasts so long and you don't have video? But if you live in the West, one of the things that you'll come across is that we have long commute times between work and home, and we typically do listen to podcasts over a period of like an hour and a half to 2 hours, like between gym and picking up the kids and dropping off the kids and forgetting the kids and going back to pick them up after forgetting them, all those situations. So nonetheless, we thank you all. Take care and bye.
Bye.